Hello everyone, today we will learn about another case. The case of Thad Reynolds. On the morning of Monday, July 5, 2004, when it was still dark at the Frito-Lay distribution center, which was located in one of the suburbs of Georgia, USA, a courier was preparing to load his car with parcels to start his usual work shift. As he approached the offices, he noticed something unusual. An unfamiliar man was quickly moving across the parking lot. The man looked around warily. Typically, employees arrived much later, with only a few workaholics showing up early. Initially, the courier did not think much of it, until he became an unwitting witness to even more suspicious behavior. As soon as this unfamiliar man approached a mini-van parked inconspicuously, he took off his shirt and threw it in the trunk, after which he changed it while looking around. The stranger then got behind the wheel and drove away, oblivious to the courier watching him. Concerned by the man's behavior, the courier approached the spot where the car had been parked and noticed blood on the asphalt. Everything seemed increasingly suspicious. When the witness entered the office to see what was going on inside, he found the general manager of the distribution center, Thad Reynolds, unconscious on the floor in a pool of his own blood. Alarmed, the courier immediately called 911. Within minutes, an ambulance crew arrived at the office, but the community was shaken by this event. In the small suburb where many knew each other, such a tragic death seemed unthinkable. This news especially alarmed the parishioners of the local church, who knew Thad Reynolds well as his wife, Michelle. Thad was not only the general manager of the distribution center, but also a volunteer pastor at the Baptist church. The Reynolds seemed like a beautiful and loving couple who had 4 daughters and a happy, established life together. Thad was a devoted father and a devout Christian who dedicated his life to his family and helping others. Back in the 80s, Michelle and Thad were ordinary high school students who fell in love. Michelle was a cheerleader who became prom queen, and Thad was a popular, handsome football player with great expectations. It seemed like they was made for each other. They were often referred to as Ken and Barbie. Both were very religious, as were their families. They married in a Baptist church in 1987, right after graduation. The newlyweds started their careers, with Thad working and Michelle as an assistant administrator. They dreamed of a beautiful house, a video camera, and going on a cruise. These goals were achieved quite quickly. In 1992, they welcomed a daughter, which brought significant changes to their lives. At that moment, Michelle became a housewife, wanting to be a loving mother and wife. During this period, she delved into everything necessary to cope with the growing needs of the family. It seemed like everything was going well, but in 1993, a year after the birth of their daughter, Michelle admitted that she wanted a divorce. It seemed that she saw some kind of liberation in this. However, Thad viewed the situation as a real tragedy. During this time, he stopped attending church. As a pastor, Thad struggled with what to do in this situation, but he received strong support from his parishioners, who prayed for him. Even so, Thad and Michelle divorced, and Thad was heartbroken. He could not come to terms with the situation and was persistent in wanting to win back his beloved. At first, she did not agree, and he tried to build relationships with other women but could not forget Michelle. Thad did not give up, and finally, 2 years after the divorce, his efforts bore fruit. Thad thanked the parishioners of the church for their prayers that had been answered. Thad and Michelle remarried in 1997, in the same church. They built a new house near Thad's parents' residence, where they had 3 more daughters. Once again, the Reynolds family appeared to be a loving family. The divorce from a few years prior seemed like just a misunderstanding in a distant memory. During this period, Thad received a promotion at work and became a regional manager at the Frito-Lay distribution center. Thad and Michelle became a model for local families with good income, a nice house, and homeschooled children. Thad's faith grew stronger. He sincerely believed that his prayers were heard by God and was very grateful to the local community. They were sociable and formed a wide circle of acquaintances. Thad and Michelle developed particularly warm relationships with Harper, a volunteer church leader and volunteer family pastor at Hollywood Baptist, who also had a wife named Paige and 3 small daughters. All the members of the families got along well. Thad worked mainly remotely, while Michelle and Paige became best friends, accompanying each other everywhere. Their children were also very friendly. However, the idyllic friendship between the families began to change suddenly in 2004 when Paige noticed that her friend was starting to avoid her and making an effort to maintain distance in every possible way. Paige tried to find out what was going on and talked to Thad. He referenced family issues, which allegedly led to a test of Michelle's character. In fact, Michelle wanted Thad to break off her relationship with her husband, who was increasingly immersed in church affairs, distancing himself from her. However, she understood that he would resist this in every way possible. Additionally, a divorce would jeopardize the pastor's career, which he had long sought. An outlet for him was communication with his congregation. They regularly supported him on the internet. In parallel, the men began to work together at the church, which made their meetings more frequent. The last of them occurred on July 4, 2004. The couples met again at the church, and after the service, they went to a local park to spend time together playing volleyball. Paige noticed that Michelle was more flirtatious with her husband that evening than usual. By the end of the joint vacation, the couples gathered their children and went home. She did even ask her husband not to communicate with Michelle. The next morning, on July 5, 2004, Thad got up early, which was normal for him. He arrived at work much earlier than the other employees, after which he would start his shift. After he walked inside, a burgundy minivan stopped in the parking lot near the offices. A man got out and entered the building. A few minutes later, Thad Reynolds was killed. Soon after, the county police received a call from the distribution center. A witness found a body outside of the offices. The deceased was found to have multiple stab wounds all over his body, including several defensive injuries on his hands. He had desperately tried to defend himself but was unable to resist the armed criminal. The witness, a courier, mentioned that he saw the probable attacker but did not get a good look at his face or the license plate number of the car he drove away in because it was very dark. However, he provided some valuable clues. Evidence found at the scene of the bloody massacre confirmed that the suspect and the person seen by the courier were the same. It soon became obvious that the attacker was injured. His blood was found near the doorway at the entrance to the office and near the car. According to investigators, there was nothing unusual about this, as attackers often cut themselves on the blade when using a knife. This provided detectives with several important clues. Firstly, it was clear that the attacker was an inexperienced criminal since a lot of evidence was left at the scene. Aside from the blood, they found a hunting knife, which became the presumed murder weapon, allowing them to track down its place of purchase. Secondly, in the parking lot next to the minivan, they found custom-made glasses, probably dropped by the criminal while he was changing clothes. Apparently, he was trying to escape from the crime scene as quickly as possible and didn't bother to look for them. Naturally, such an accessory could help in identifying the criminal since they had a custom prescription. Thad's family was notified of what had happened, and his wife was in Thad to identify the deceased. The information spread rapidly throughout the small town. Among the first to learn of the situation was Scott Harper, who immediately got together with his wife and went to support Michelle during this difficult time. Imagine Paige's surprise when she saw that there were no signs of panic or tears of frustration from Michelle, which were typically expected from a grieving widow. Instead, she appeared distant and a bit embarrassed. Thad's loved ones also immediately noticed this strange behavior. Law enforcement officers began working at the crime scene from the first moments. The forensic examination quickly indicated that this attack could not have been random in nature. The only thing that seemed clear was that it had a personal motive. However, the money from the cash register remained untouched. Nothing was taken from Thad, not even his wallet, car keys, or mobile phone, all of which were left in their place. This means the stranger came to the office solely to commit murder. Additionally, the choice of weapon further supported these assumptions, as cruelty and the use of a knife imply close contact. It is likely that the criminal hated his victim and had a personal motive for such a brutal attack. On the evening of the same day, news channels reported that local residents should be aware of a possible threat. The police sought information and attempted Thad to find witnesses who could provide valuable clues. The local community supported several appeals to the police station, but nothing new emerged from the collected evidence. From the outset, detectives paid particular attention to Scott, who was close to the victims like no one else. Yet, none of the community members could believe Scott was capable of such an act, especially given that the relationships between the families seemed very friendly, resembling a model friendship free of hatred or malice. However, the evidence all pointed toward him. He drove a burgundy minivan, which was identical to the killer's vehicle, according to the main witness. Scott was promptly asked to come to the station and provide a statement. The reasons to pay attention to Scott turned out to be more than sufficient. It was revealed that another witness, who worked part-time installing, repairing telephone lines, had accidentally overheard a conversation between Scott and a woman, clearly not his wife, weeks before the crime. In that conversation, Scott even called her by name, Michelle. They flirted so openly that it was reminiscent of young lovers. Furthermore, Scott wore custom-made glasses, as everyone knew he had severe vision problems, making the accessory significant in identifying the criminal. They clearly had a motive to get rid of Thad, who was an obstacle to their happiness. Gradually, Scott Harper's wife began to notice unusual moments in his behavior. When reasonable suspicions arose, she became even more attentive. Firstly, Paige could not find her husband's glasses, which he always wore. Secondly, there were some bruises and scratches under his eyes from the glasses. In addition, there were bandages on his index and middle fingers, which he attributed to an injury received in the gym. The only thing missing was material evidence confirming Scott's involvement. The detectives expect Thad to find bloody clothes belonging to the killer, but it was all in vain. The search of Harper's house yielded no results. On Wednesday, July 7th, Scott was being interrogated at the police station. He attributed his injured hand to an accident at the gym, where he had crushed his fingers. Scott denied having had an affair with Michelle, also stated that he had lost his glasses and could not provide them to the detectives despite all persistent requests. He allegedly did not even have a doctor's prescription for their manufacture. Paige began to grow suspicious of her husband, but he stubbornly remained silent. According to Paige, he had been behaving strangely since Monday morning. Despite a whole list of circumstantial evidence, Scott was released from the police station. Naturally, this did not mean that the investigators took him at his word. It just took time to obtain warrants and gather more incriminating evidence. There were more inconsistencies. In particular, on the morning of the murder, he had sent Michelle a message in which he asked her to stop him if there was any doubt. She ordered him to act. These words sounded suspicious. It was believed that he was coordinating with his mistress. The detectives were in no hurry to bring Michelle in for questioning so as not to traumatize or scare her off. First, they wanted Thad to gather even more information, which led the detectives to Scott's workplace. The primary task was to check his computer. However, the correspondence had been deleted. Fortunately, a significant part of it was easily restored, which became a valuable source of information. The records showed that most of the messages from Scott were sent to Michelle Reynolds. He used his work computer to hide the correspondence from his wife. It all started as a routine discussion concerning the church youth group, but later the communication became increasingly personal. About a month before Thad's death, they began exchanging intimate letters regularly. They entered into a romantic relationship and planned to be together. Scott intended to leave his wife and move Michelle to Portland. While there were many ambiguous texts, there were no specific indications of malicious plans, making the situation complicated. On the day when Paige noticed that Michelle was somehow avoiding her, she was actually with Scott. This occurred during a trip related to church activities, but it did not prevent them from having sinful thoughts. The content of the letters revealed that Michelle desperately wants to break up with her husband, but Thad denied the very possibility of divorce. He was ready to do anything to keep his beautiful wife close to him, but it cost him his life. Detectives believed that, against this backdrop, Michelle realized that there was only one way to get out of this relationship: her husband's death. She did not want to shed blood with her own hands, so she sought the help of her lover. Clearly, both experienced intense feelings for each other. In search of evidence, investigators checked Scott's browser history. It turned out that he was looking for information suggesting that he wanted Thad not only to get rid of his mistress's husband but also to remain unpunished. The police eventually managed to uncover one of the key emails in which they planned the attack, intending to enter through the window when there would be fewer patrols on the streets, thereby increasing the chances of going unnoticed. Michelle played an active role in this plan, coordinating the actions when Thad left for work early on Monday morning. She immediately called her lover to order the attack. Even despite the veiled phrases and coded messages, it was obvious that early in the morning of July 5, 2004, the tragic was meant to happen. By this point, the police had gathered enough damning evidence against Michelle and Scott. The first to be ours Thad was Scott Harper, who was charged with first-degree murder with aggravating circumstances. Detectives hoped that he would inevitably turn on Michelle, but instead, his feelings appeared to be stronger than they expect, as he exercised his right to remain silent immediately after the arrest and refused to cooperate. However, Scott's confirmation was not necessary, as his work computer provided enough circumstantial evidence to also charge Michelle. She was arrested the same day following Scott's arrest. The detectives detained her while she was leaving her lawyer's office in the city center. She immediately refused to speak, citing her rights. When the parishioners of the church where Thad served found out that his wife and his best friend had conspired against him, everyone was shocked. They all remembered how Thad had asked everyone to pray for his wife during his life and had wished for her return after the divorce, completely unaware of the betrayal that had taken place. This could end in a bloody massacre at the hands of those closest to him. Sheath of a hunting knife was found right in Thad's office, led them to track it down to the moment of purchase in the store. Judging by the recordings from the surveillance cameras, it was Scott bought it, but now the murder weapon was missing. It was believed that the killer managed to dispose of it. Crime scene investigation results are available. The drops of blood at the crime scene turned out to be Scott's blood. Suddenly, the situation changed on July 13 when one of Scott's colleagues from the medical center where he worked contacted the police station. One of the IT department employees, who was concerned about Thad Reynolds' fate, decided to conduct his own investigation. He knew the layout of the buildings and the places where something could be carefully hidden. The object was small, and he immediately thought it was worth checking the niches under the floor through which communications and wires were laid to the office. Naturally, Scott knew about them, as he had worked in this department. To his surprise, the colleague found both the knife and bloody clothing, which he immediately reported to the police. On November 17, 2004, the preliminary stage of the hearings began, during which the order of the criminals' trials was evaluated. It was obvious that Michelle had a much better chance of avoiding imprisonment, as there was very weak evidence against her. All of it was indirect. In contrast, the evidence against Scott looked much more compelling, including the murder weapon and the bloody knife. The prosecutor believed that Scott had no chance of going unpunished, while new valuable details could come to light during the trial of the criminals. The police also found video recordings from the stores that Scott had visited Thad, located a salesperson who remembered the man who had bought the hunting knife. A prescription from Scott's eye doctor also appeared at the crime scene. As expected, it matched the glasses found there. At the November hearing, the district attorney announced that he would seek the death penalty for both defendants. This was a clever move, as there was nothing significant against Michelle so far. The authorities hoped that Scott would be able to rectify this situation, realizing that he had nothing left to lose. It was assumed that the man would be offered a deal, which would be his only chance to avoid capital punishment. They believed that he was weak in spirit, otherwise, he would not have succumbed to the charms of Michelle, a seductress and manipulator. However, they were wrong. Scott did not give in, even under pressure from his lawyer, who believed that this was the only way to save his life. Even behind prison bars, Scott and Michelle continued to correspond. Michelle used excerpts from the Bible, highlighting certain words, while Scott composed real sentences that law enforcement officers could read. But these notes could not convince the jury, which would have been difficult. They continued to play their spy game, and they had plenty of time, cases involving capital punishment traditionally turn into lengthy legal maneuvering on the part of the lawyers. All this dragged on for months and even years. Scott turned out to be a very persistent man and held out until the fall of 2008. After 4 years spent in prison, he finally agreed to cooperate with the police. However, even now, concerns about his mistress occupied the main place in his thoughts. Scott agreed to confess in exchange for a life sentence and also demanded that the death penalty never be used against Michelle. The deal was approved on October 1, 2008. Scott admitted his guilt. According to him, the day before the attack, Michelle had once again told him that they could not be together while Thad was alive. She had been turning her lover, Scott, against her husband for a long time, and in parallel, she was poisoning Thad with more harmful food that would kill him faster. Pressure was the last drop. Right after that, Scott went to a camping equipment store where he bought a hunting knife. That same day, he had to deal with Thad, who usually stayed in the office later than everyone else. Scott and Michelle even went to a restaurant together, where he confessed to his failure, and then they planned the attack for the next morning. They kissed in the parking lot of the car like teenagers. When Scott arrived at Thad's office with a knife in his hands, he told Thad, "I want the same as you," and then attacked his friend. Interestingly, until this point, Michelle had never provided any testimony. By exercising her right to remain silent, her statements could be interpreted from different angles, making the trial against her a rather risky endeavor. In particular, her correspondence never directly addressed their intentions. Using encryption and veiled propositions, it was almost impossible to prove guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. During her 6 years in prison, Michelle Reynolds changed significantly and became unrecognizable. When she spoke to the police, however, her responses were still veiled offers. Michelle avoided direct answers, stating that she felt guilty because she had an affair that led to her husband's death. Of course, this did not satisfy Thad's mother, who simply wanted Thad to know why he had to die. Michelle had no answer. Michelle eventually pleaded guilty to involuntary manslaughter and was sentenced to 20 years in prison in January 2010. Richard Scott Harper pleaded guilty to murder and received a life sentence without parole. This tragedy left a bloody mark not only on the lives of 2 families but also on the congregation. The death of the pastor, who was so cruelly murdered at the behest of his wife, was one of the most disturbing and painful events for them. Now, regarding the repose of Thad's soul, this situation caused mixed feelings. Everyone remembered how they had prayed for the Reynolds to be together, but now they could not discern whether this was divine providence or a devilish joke. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Dina Thompson. In the summer of 2022, the British media reported the release of one of the country's most dangerous criminals, 61-year-old Dina Thompson, known as the Black Widow. Today, I'll explain how she became infamous across the UK and why some people still fear her. Dina was born in 1960 in Hendon, a suburb of London. Her family was not poor, but barely made ends meet. Dina's father, a prison guard, was passionate about sports. He encouraged Dina to join a sports club, where she practiced gymnastics. He often participated in competitions and traveled abroad, often taking Dina with him. Dina grew up to be a cheerful and sociable girl, which made it easy for her to meet and connect with boys. After graduating from university, Dina found a job. In 1982, at the age of 22, she met a young man named Lee Wyatt on a date arranged by Lee's cousin. They felt a strong connection from the first meeting. 2 years later, in 1984, they married. After the wedding, they moved to Yapton, a small village in West Sussex, England, with a population of only 3,000. In Yapton, the Dana family welcomed a son, and Dina began working as a treasurer at a construction company. Meanwhile, Lee started a business selling designer stuffed toys, which they designed together. Their neighbors considered them a typical family. The neighbors did not have a close relationship with the Dina family. However, the attractive Dina often attracted the attention of local men. In 1991, The 31-year-old Dina met a local journalist named Julian Webb. He wrote articles about products sold in shops across West Sussex. Julian, 28, asked Dina to model clothes and display household items for money. She accepted his offer, and soon her picture appeared in the local newspapers. A month after Dina and Julian met, neighbors spotted them kissing near Julian's house. A few months later, Julian took Dina to his mother and expressed his desire to marry her. Julian's mother was surprised at how quickly things had progressed. She noted that Julian had met Dina in May, and by August, they were planning their wedding. Soon the whole village of Yapton knew about it. It was also known that Dina was still legally married to her first husband, Lee Wyatt. However, Lee had been missing for a long time at the time, and no one knew where he was. On the north coast of Cornwall, in the small resort town of Newquay, a young man named Colin Mitchell arrived and began looking for work at various entertainment venues. He was hired as a junior manager at an arcade. Colin provided his papers and explained that he had left West Sussex due to some problems. Initially, he appeared friendly and cheerful to everyone. However, it was soon realized that he was slightly deaf, which sometimes made communication difficult. As a result, the arcade staff often had to approach him and gently tap him on the shoulder to get his attention. It was soon realized that Colin Mitchell was his alias. His real name was Lee Wyatt. He explained that he had escaped trouble in West Sussex. Living with Dina in the village of Yapton, his wife was involved in toy manufacturing. Their most popular product was a leprechaun called Sean, who sold well both locally and outside the county. In the summer of 1991, Dina informed Lee that the Disney Corporation was interested in Sean the Leprechaun and was willing to pay $50 million for the rights to the character. Dina then informed Lee that the mafia had found out about their arrangement and was threatening to kill the entire family unless they handed over most of their money. Dina convinced him that he needed to flee immediately to protect his family. Lee obtained documents under the name Colin Mitchell and traveled to Cornwall County. The decision to flee may have saved his life. However, the real threat was not from the mafia, as there had never been any deal with Disney. Dina made up the story and convinced her husband that it was true. While on the run, he lived in an unfamiliar city under a false identity as a homeless person. He worked and sent most of his earnings to his son, continuing to support the family. On November 2, 1991, Dina used her money to marry her second husband, journalist Julian Webb. Lee was away and unaware of the situation. Julian was overjoyed to marry Dina, believing she was now his. However, a few months after the wedding, Dina informed Julian that she was terminally ill and that her company was pressuring her to resign. $26,000 had gone missing from the accounts of the companies where Dina worked as treasurer, prompting the police to focus their investigation on her. Dina claimed that her first husband, Lee Wyatt, was responsible for the theft. She alleged that he had stolen the money and gone into hiding, but that he had now returned to their village of Yapton and threatened her. Dina produced threatening letters from Lee and shared recordings of phone calls in which he spoke of seeking revenge. She also alleged that he had come to her home and assaulted her. However, there was no evidence to support this claim. Notably, a few months after Dina married Julian, Lee returned to Yapton when he learned of Dina's marriage. Lee created scandals involving Dina. The police believed Dina's accusations and began pursuing Lee, who went into hiding. The lies complicated Dina's life and the lives of the men involved with her. Julian had given Dina $25,000 from his savings to treat a terminal illness that she claimed was the reason she had lost her job. However, as the money began to run out, Julian began asking Dina about her progress. To his surprise, Dina had no medical documents to prove that she was actually ill or receiving treatment. On 30 June 1994, Julian celebrated his 300th birthday at home with his wife, Dana. In the evening, Julian's mother called, but Dina answered the phone and said that Julian was feeling unwell and unable to talk. The mother suggested that Dina call a doctor, but Dina did not follow this advice. That night, Julian died. Forensic experts concluded that he had died from a drug overdose, but they were unable to determine whether his death was a result of criminal activity. Dina insisted that Julian had chosen to end his life. When police questioned the neighbors, they learned that there had been unusual activity involving the couple 2 to 4 days before the tragedy. Dina and Julian had been arguing loudly about money, which surprised their neighbors, as they were not used to hearing arguments in Dina's household. Julian was generally considered a positive and cheerful person. The day after Julian's tragic death, Dina went to his workplace to ask about receiving $35,000 from his insurance policy. However, it is reported that she never received the money. In addition, their marriage was considered invalid because Dina was still the legal wife of her first husband, Lee Wyatt. Dina insisted on having Julian's body cremated, but his mother strongly opposed the decision. At Julian's funeral, Dina wore a black leather miniskirt and a revealing black blouse, showing no sign of grief. After Julian's death, she turned her home into a meeting place for men. Although many men visited her, none stayed for more than a day. In 1997, Dina officially divorced her first husband, Lee Wyatt, and won her freedom. The following year, she met Richard Thompson. Shortly after meeting him, Dina confided that she was battling breast cancer. Richard, who supported her, gave her all of his savings and promised to make the rest of her life enjoyable. They traveled from England to Florida, where Richard had a lavish wedding ceremony at a luxury hotel with staff as witnesses. After the wedding, they moved to Brighton, East Sussex, on the south coast of England. Richard had always wanted to buy a boat and pursue a career in fishing. Dina encouraged him to take courses to start a yacht charter business for amateur fishermen, while Richard would take on the role of captain, helping beginners learn how to fish. 8 months after the wedding, Dina told her husband that she wanted to give him a special gift. On January 1, 2000, they decided to take a shower together. Dina then asked if she could tie Richard up, and he agreed. She tied him up, gagged him, and covered his face with a towel. Richard then waited, confused, for what he thought was a prank. Suddenly, Dina hit him with a baseball bat, followed by another blow. Fortunately, Richard freed his hands and lunged at her. At that point, Dina grabbed a knife and stabbed him in the shoulder. Only then was Richard able to grab Dina and subdue her. Richard reported the incident to the police. Dina accused her husband of assaulting her, claiming that she acted in self-defense. The next day, a real estate staff came to Richard's house, expecting to meet Dina to sell real estate. Richard was surprised when he opened the door. When he saw the agent, Richard realized what was going on. He suspected Dina had planned to kill him, sell the house, and disappear, knowing that since he was going to America, no one would look for him during the trial. Dina drained Richard's bank account by forging his signature. She also accumulated a large debt on his credit cards. In addition, they reported other victims, former lovers of Dina, including businessmen, teachers, prison guards, and even a convicted felon. All of these men claimed that Dina manipulated them, demanding money and pretending to be seriously ill. Dina asked for money from many men. While some gave her money willingly, others had their accounts secretly drained by Dina. The truth about her first husband, Lee, was revealed. In 1991, Dina stole money from her workplace, where she worked as a cashier. At the time, she produced threatening letters allegedly written by Lee and played recordings of phone calls in which he spoke of possible revenge. However, in 2000, it was revealed that the letters and recordings were made while Lee was preparing to escape from a mafia organization. Dina had convinced him to do so in order to make people think he had disappeared and abandoned her. Lee believed this would protect him and their son from threats from the mafia. In 2000, a jury acquitted Dina Thompson in a case involving an alleged assault on her third husband, Richard Thompson. The judge described Richard as a paranoid attention seeker. Although Dina was cleared of the felony charge, she was convicted of 15 other counts of financial fraud. She was sentenced to 3 years and 9 months in prison. A strange incident involving her husband, coupled with complaints about her from multiple lovers, led to an investigation into Dina and the death of her second husband, Julian Webb. Dina gave conflicting accounts of what happened to Julian. She told her mother that he had sunstroke after drinking too much on his birthday and fell asleep in the sun. However, Julian's mother did not believe this story, knowing that he had always been healthy and rarely drank. She often urged Julian to leave Dina. Dina claimed to investigators that Julian had taken his own life, but those who knew him found this hard to believe, as he was usually cheerful and rarely had conflicts with anyone. To a former co-worker, Dina mentioned that Julian died from a steroid overdose to maintain his healthy physique, but this was also false. A friend of Dina's revealed that she had hinted at poisoning her second husband Julian by secretly adding the drug to Julian's favorite spicy food. The police tracked down the owner of a small restaurant where Julian frequently ordered. They recalled that on the day Julian died, Dina had gone to the restaurant and ordered rice with curry in a takeout box. Police speculated that the strong flavor of the curry may have effectively masked the bitter taste of the medication. In October 2001, 7 years after Julian's death, the investigation into his death continued. Julian's body was exhumed and sent for a re-examination. New tests, unlike the original ones, found higher levels of the drug in his system. It was discovered that he had been poisoned with a large dose of antidepressants, which Dina had mixed into Julian's favorite dish, curry rice. In addition, she had added a large dose of aspirin to the drink he had with his meal. On his birthday, when Julian's mother called to congratulate him, he was lying in bed, almost unconscious. At that point, there was still a chance to save him. The trial of 43-year-old Dina Thompson took place in 2003. A senior police officer said she was the most dangerous woman he had ever met. The judge also noted that Dina was one of the best prolific liars he had ever seen. In 2003, Dina Thompson was convicted of murdering her second husband, Julian Webb. She was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 16 years. Dina's crimes were reported on numerous television shows, crime magazines and newspapers, earning her the nickname the Black Widow. In 2010, police began investigating the disappearance of Stoyan Kostov, one of Dina's first lovers from Bulgaria. Dina and Stoyan were in a relationship from the late 1970s to the early 1980s. During her childhood, Dina and her father traveled to competitions in various countries, including Bulgaria. During one of these trips, Dina met a young man and they quickly became close friends. Stoyan's family mentioned a number of strange incidents involving him and Dina. After their brief relationship, the young man mysteriously disappeared and was never found, dead or alive. It is suspected that Stoyan may have been one of Dina's first victims. While in prison, Dina attended rehabilitation courses and worked with a psychologist. In 2021, the police investigating her case expressed concern about her chances of being released, stating that she would commit another crime. Dina would not be able to stop, as she showed no remorse. However, during her time in prison, she was considered a model prisoner and always spoke positively. Dina Thompson, 61, was released from prison in the summer of 2022. Upon her release, she must notify the police of any romantic relationships she has had. She is also banned from contacting her ex-husbands and other men affected by her actions. Dina must also wear a tracking bracelet to monitor her movements, abide by a curfew, and provide details of her banking transactions if requested by the police. Richard Thompson, 63, who still lives in East Sussex, runs a property maintenance business. After learning of Dina's release, he expressed concern for his safety. Fully aware of what his ex-wife could do, he feared that his peaceful life was over. In July 2022, British newspapers published photos of Dina leaving a discount store carrying a large bag. Dina is now free to walk the streets of England. It is uncertain whether she has lured more victims or whether she has truly changed and chosen to live a better life. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today, we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Diana Garnica. On Saturday, May 6, 2017, a 17-year-old girl named Diana Garnica went out to meet her 40-year-old neighbor, Dario Suarez. As the day drew to a close, Diana did not return home. Her mother became concerned and tried to contact her, but was unable to reach her. After speaking with Dario, who gave no information about their encounter and claimed that he had not seen Diana that day, her mother became increasingly suspicious. Diana Garnica was born on March 30, 2000, in Argentina. Those who knew her, including friends and family, noted that she displayed maturity beyond her years. Diana was very responsible and enjoyed helping her family. A diligent student, she did well in school, but eventually had to drop out of school to help her family during the financial crisis. She made the difficult choice to drop out of school to find a job and help her parents. In addition, Diana has a boyfriend her own age. People also comment on her ability to protect herself. She knows how to keep her distance from rude or dangerous people. Diana is very friendly and is the second child in a family of 8 siblings. Later, her parents divorced, which was especially difficult for her, as she had deep feelings for her father. However, she maintained a close relationship with her mother. After the divorce, Diana's mother moved with all the children to a town in Alderates, Tucumán province. After settling into their new home, they got to know their closest neighbors, Dario Suarez and his family. Susana, Diana's mother, and her siblings formed a strong friendship with Dario's family, and they became so close that they treated each other like family. Susana often babysat Dario's children while they were away. Dario respected and loved Diana's family and treated her with great care, like his own sister. There was never any indication that Dario had inappropriate behavior towards Diana or her family, reflecting the deep trust and understanding between the two families. Diana went to work every morning and came home in the evening. Occasionally, she met members of her church community and spent time with her boyfriend and close friends. Unlike many girls her age, Diana did not like to dance and avoided discos and nightclubs. Those who knew her realized that she preferred to spend her free time at home. On May 6, 2017, Diana finished her work as usual and waited for her sister at the designated place so they could go home together, just like they did every day. When Diana got home, her neighbor Dario called her and asked if they could meet to buy an air conditioner as a surprise for his mother. He asked her to keep it a secret. However, after hanging up, Diana went to her mother's room and excitedly recounted the whole conversation, ignoring Dario's request to keep it a secret. She found it funny because it was still a long way from summer. In May, where she lived, the weather was quite cool and sometimes even cold. At that time, Diana did not suspect anything unusual and just told her mother that she would help Dario choose a gift. Diana had a very close relationship with her family and shared everything with them. On that unfortunate day, Dario sent Diana several text messages. He reminded her about the gift for her mother and emphasized that no one in her family should know about it, not her mother, father, siblings, or anyone else. Dario also asked Diana to keep their motorbike trip a secret. However, Diana read all of his messages but chose not to keep it a secret. She told her mother Susana everything. As a result, her mother was fully informed about the scheduled meeting between Diana and Dario. Diana left the house to wait for Dario at the bus stop. hours passed, and finally, Dario returned home. Zuzana heard the sound of his motorbike and went out to check. Seeing Dario alone, she assumed that Diana had chosen to walk home alone. She thought that Dario's wife might be jealous. Therefore, Zuzana decided to wait a little longer, hoping that her daughter would come home soon. Time passed, and the girl still did not return. Worried, Zuzana went to see Dario to ask about Diana's whereabouts. Dario quickly claimed that he did not know where she was, saying that he had not seen her that day. This answer made Zuzana feel strange and suspicious because she knew that her daughter was supposed to meet Dario. Although he denied it, Dario offered to help by suggesting that he could use his motorbike to find Diana, assuming that she had just gone out for a walk. Diana's relatives called her several times, but soon realized that it was useless. She had left her phone at home while it was charging and could not answer any calls or messages. They decided to check her text message history and found every text message that Dario had sent to Diana that day. It was learned that Dario had asked Diana to help him buy a gift for his mother, which suggested that they had indeed met. One of Diana's brothers then decided to confront Dario about these messages, hoping to get him to admit that Diana was with him. When Dario noticed one of Diana's brothers approaching his house, he fled. Diana's father, who was divorced from her mother and lived on his own, learned of her disappearance and quickly arrived at the scene. The entire family then went to the police for assistance. At the police station, Diana's relatives explained in detail what had happened and showed several text messages that implicated Dario in their daughter's disappearance. For the family, Dario was the only suspect. However, the police dismissed their concerns and did not take their complaint seriously. Instead, they suggested that the family look for common gathering places for young people. Diana's parents were disappointed with the police response and insisted that if their daughter went anywhere, it was only between home and work, occasionally going to church. They believed that there were only a few places where she could have gone. In addition, the family was certain that on that day, she had met her neighbor Dario, but he had returned without her and had begun to avoid them. Despite this information, the police informed Diana's relatives that they could not file a missing person report because they did not have enough personnel and resources to search for her. They advised the family to go to another police station with patrols to begin the search immediately. However, as the family left the station feeling hopeless, they were surprised to see a patrol car parked at the entrance with 7 police officers nearby, relaxing and chatting. The problem was that they had the resources to conduct a search for the missing Diana, but they chose not to. Considering the situation, Diana's family decided to continue looking for Dario, who had tried to run away. They went to the brick factory where Dario was supposed to work. When Diana's father got out of the car, he noticed that Dario's entire family had gathered near the factory building for some unknown reason. This was unusual, especially since it was 2 a.m. on a Sunday morning. Inside the factory, the lights were still on and the kilns were still running, even though they had not been used for months. Diana's father asked Dario's family where he was. They replied that he had gone to the toilet. However, Diana's relatives soon discovered that Dario had actually gone deep into the mountains and had no intention of returning. Diana's family tried to talk to his wife and mother. Unfortunately, no one could provide any information about Dario's situation. Diana's family was suspicious and asked questions. Why was Dario's entire family at the factory that night if none of them knew what had happened? Why was the factory, which had been shut down for a long time, suddenly operating early on a Sunday morning? Frustrated, Diana's family approached the judiciary and tried to file a complaint with the prosecutor's office. They expressed their concerns by going to the police the day before, and the police assured them that information about Diana's disappearance would be passed on to the prosecutor's office. However, when they arrived, no one at the office knew about the situation. possibly because no official statement had been filed. As a result, the family had to start the complaint process all over again. After filing a new complaint, prosecutor Claudio Bonari went to the scene of the incident. Claudio instinctively sensed that something was amiss, so he quickly began organizing searches. He started at the home of the suspect, Dario Suarez, and then moved to the brick factory where Dario worked. The prosecutor discovered that the factory's kiln had been operating the night before, which raised some disturbing thoughts. Claudio later reported that he faced unexpected challenges during the investigation that day. The judges from the investigative court and his office secretary were not present, which prevented them from issuing a search warrant in time. Prosecutor Claudio therefore decided to conduct searches without the necessary warrant. He began his investigation by searching Dario's home and the factory. The prosecutor's main theory was that Dario might have kidnapped Diana and assaulted her. According to this theory, the factory could be the crime scene where Dario dumped the body. However, the prosecutor also considered the possibility that Dario did not act alone. He suspected that other people, including Dario's wife, mother, factory owner, and employees who were present that night, might have been involved in the crime. A second investigation was launched. The theory was that Diana might have been kidnapped and possibly handed over to the mafia or human traffickers. This theory did not come about by accident. In fact, in Diana's family, it was discovered that Dario was involved with very dangerous people who kidnapped young girls to then sell them or transfer them to bars and nightclubs. A girl on Facebook claimed that a man named Christian had handed Diana over to a human trafficking group. She detailed on her personal page how Diana was put in a nice car and mentioned an envelope of money that was supposed to be for Christian. However, this so-called witness later confessed that she had lied to blame her ex-boyfriend for everything after he left her. This situation required the prosecutors and their team to thoroughly review the documents they had for the investigation. As a result, significant resources were wasted on this false lead, hindering the actual investigation. Meanwhile, prosecutor Claudio chose to pursue the case under the hypothesis of illegal detention and possible murder. His main theory was supported by the efforts of sniffer dogs who searched the area, as well as firefighters from Punta Arena, who assisted in the police-led searches and raids. The dogs repeatedly followed Diana's scent, leading them in the same direction. This gave them a clear path that she would have taken that day. The path started from Diana's house, then to Dario's house, and continued from there to the brick factory. The police therefore focused their search on both Dario's house and the factory. At the factory, the dogs discovered a pendant with the letter D and a belt with traces of blood. During a search of the homes of Dario and his relatives, police confiscated their cell phones and examined their text message histories. A manuscript discovered at Dario's home confirmed that his relatives were involved in covering up the crime. Regarding the brick factory, the prosecutor conducted 3 searches there, believing that the final crucial evidence would be discovered to clarify what happened on May 6. Claudio was convinced that all the answers would be found at the site. Therefore, on May 13, the police, together with forensic experts, returned to the factory for the 3rd time in a week to re-examine the furnace that had attracted the dogs' attention. In the furnace, they found the remains of teeth and a piece of surgical steel. A month later, on June 18, prosecutor Claudio informed the parties concerned of some disturbing news. The evidence found at the brick factory had mysteriously disappeared. As a result, the prosecutor declared the case secret, which meant that neither the parties concerned nor the media would receive any further updates. An internal investigation was launched involving 10 police officers. 7 were released while 3 faced charges. The case has been investigated in secret since then. There was speculation that the envelopes containing the evidence may have been damaged, leading to the loss of evidence. However, prosecutor Claudio and Diana's family were not convinced by this explanation. They believed that those involved in their daughter's disappearance were powerful and dangerous people who could manipulate the situation to hide any information. Dario later turned himself in to the police. What was most surprising was that Dario arrived with a highly paid and clearly financially beyond his means private attorney. This was no ordinary attorney. He was a top specialist, often hired by the wealthy and influential. He was not a public defender, but someone with a proven track record of successfully defending clients involved in questionable activities. Dario arrived with this attorney, much to Diana's family's surprise. Everyone knew that Dario could not afford such legal representation. In fact, Diana's parents had struggled to raise enough money to hire an attorney to help investigate their daughter's case. Dario's ability to hire such an expensive attorney raised suspicions about his involvement in a serious situation and showed that he had connections with powerful people. Dario's lawyer ordered him to exercise his right to silence and confirm only what had already been proven by the accusing party. In particular, the text messages that he exchanged with Diana on the day of her disappearance. The lawyer also instructed that the initial evidence gathered by Prosecutor Claudio be dismissed, as the searches had been conducted without proper authorization. Of the 12 people initially suspected and detained in connection with the case, all were eventually released, leaving only Dario in custody. As there was no further evidence linking him to the crime beyond what had already been gathered, the police were unable to make any progress in solving the case or bring further charges. As a result, the investigation stalled and Dario was eventually released on bail. In January 2018, after a series of disturbing events, Diana's sister was attacked by a woman. Diana's sister reported the incident to the police, who refused to accept her complaint. Like the initial complaint against Diana, this one failed to attract the attention of the police. Soon after, more puzzling events took place. Diana's family received small sums of cash from unidentified people on 3 separate occasions, accompanied by notes that appeared to have been written by Diana. These messages gave the family hope that she was still alive. One note read, "Mom, I'm Diana. I'm alive. They're holding me. Please come get me." Another message conveyed a similar plea. 3 banknotes were sent to a lab for analysis. 2 of them tested negative, showing that the handwriting did not match the notes in Diana's notebook. The 3rd banknote initially tested positive, showing that it matched Diana's handwriting. However, when retested, the results were negative, indicating that the handwriting was not hers. This case is indeed full of inexplicable details. First, the evidence found disappeared. Then these notes appeared. The identity of the handwriting remains unknown. The discovery of these notes has rekindled the family's hope for their daughter's return and led them to form new theories about her possible location. Diana's parents still believe she is alive, while they feel the police are unwilling to pursue her case. In May 2019, 2 years after Dario Suarez was arrested for a crime he was suspected of but had no evidence to prove, Dario was released under the Argentine Penal Code. 2 years and 4 months after Diana went missing, the federal court decided to close her case due to insufficient evidence. Currently, the main theory of the prosecution is that Diana was kidnapped and is likely the victim of violence and murder. Throughout the investigation and searches were carried out at various locations, and many witnesses were interviewed, but no one provided clear information about what happened. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Cynthia George. On an afternoon on June 16, 2001, an attack at a gas station in Akron, Ohio, shattered the peaceful atmosphere and claimed the life of a successful businessman once admired by the upper class. Ed George and Cynthia George were famous residents and were considered the wealthiest in the state of Agaya, USA. Ed was a successful Lebanese businessman who owned a banquet hall and a nightclub, He was one of 8 children in a Lebanese Catholic family. After completing his education at the University of Michigan, he joined the family business founded by his father, Edwin George, in 1948. Although the original building was destroyed by fire, Ed rebuilt it and expanded the venue to include an entertainment center for events. During its peak, the establishment hosted renowned musical acts. Cynthia George, Ed's wife, was a charming and attractive socialite, known for her petite frame, blonde hair, and striking blue eyes. They had 7 children together. Cynthia grew up in North Canton in a low-income family. Her father worked as a miner, and her mother took care of the home and children. Lacking exposure to wealth, Cynthia began working at a young age. Although she couldn't afford higher education, she quickly realized that her looks could provide her with a path to a more comfortable life, leading her to pursue a career as a dancer. At this time, Cynthia, a 20-year-old, attended a nightclub casting call in 1978, managed by Ed, who was 15 years her senior. Although she didn't get the job, she caught Ed's attention, and they began dating. He seemed to be a convinced Catholic and was in no hurry to get married. However, after 6 years together, they got married in a lavish ceremony, attended by over 500 guests. This marriage fulfilled Cynthia's dream of a luxurious lifestyle. Cynthia and Ed moved into a spacious mansion with 5 bedrooms and 5 bathrooms. First of all, they wanted children, and over the next few years, Cynthia gave birth to 4 daughters. Ed felt this wasn't enough, so they adopted 2 boys. In 1994, at the age of 40, Cynthia became pregnant again and had another girl. The family comfortably managed their large household with the help of servants and a steady income from an upscale restaurant at the club. Despite his busy work schedule, Ed always made time for his children. He would comb his daughter's hair every morning, assist with their homework in the evenings. Being a person with a healthy lifestyle, he is never absent from any sporting event. Meanwhile, Cynthia relies heavily on nannies to take care of her children and enjoys a leisurely life of partying and shopping. Her husband supported this lifestyle, giving her plenty of freedom. While his substantial wealth, Cynthia often complained about receiving too little money, even though she indulged in whatever she wanted. In fact, Cynthia turned out to be not such a decent woman as she initially seemed. From the first years of marriage, she had lovers that her husband did not suspect. She flirted and met different men right in his club. One of her main lovers was Jeff Zach, a tall and charming man known for his appeal to women. He had Israeli roots. By 1976, he dropped out of school and decided to move to his homeland to study his Jewish origins. He became a citizen of Israel and even served in the army as a paratrooper. Jeff was multilingual and claimed to be a special agent involved in real combat operations. After 3 years, he returned to the United States. At 29, he met a beautiful brunette named Bonnie Cook in an Arizona restaurant. They quickly fell in love, decided to solidify their union by marriage, and then have children. During this time, Bonnie discovered a different side of her husband. She noticed that Jeff seemed to have 2 contrasting personalities. One was calm and gentle, while the other was aggressive and cruel. These personalities appear unpredictably. 2 years after their wedding, they welcomed a son. During this period, Jeff attempted to start a new business. He had many different startup ideas, but none were successful. They managed to make ends meet and moved into a comfortable 2-story house in the small town of Stowe, Agaya. Here, Jeff began a business involving vending machines. Although he became somewhat calmer over time, he still frequently experienced angry outbursts. His violent nature even led to several legal issues. Shortly after moving in one evening, Bonnie and Jeff were dining at Ed's club when Bonnie noticed her husband staring intently at a beautiful stranger. During dinner, Jeff even complimented the blonde multiple times, which greatly upset Bonnie. This attractive woman was Cynthia. That night, Jeff also met Ed, the owner of the club, and realized that building a friendship with him could significantly benefit his business. He spent the rest of the evening socializing with Ed and his wife, leaving Bonnie alone at the table. Jeff and Ed quickly hit it off and began a friendship. Eventually, Bonnie and Cynthia also grew close, regularly visiting each other's families and celebrating holidays together. Ed invested in Jeff's business by purchasing 100 vending machines and connecting him with valuable partnerships. This investment allowed Jeff to place machines in prime locations throughout the city, leading to the success of his business. Despite the rapid development of the business, soon, Bonnie became the main breadwinner of the family. Her career as a real estate agent was thriving. During this time, Jeff retired a little from business Respawn and spent more time with their son. The boy helped service vending machines, buy products for them, and carry out scheduled repairs. Jeff also started attending his son's training sessions and sporting events. Despite the fact that the life of both families seemed ideal from the outside, problems continued inside. Cynthia, who was 40 years old at the time, struggled with depression. Her friends encouraged her to participate in a local beauty contest in Agaya in 2000, specifically for married women over 21. Although Cynthia met the age requirement, she would be competing against younger women, many nearly half her age. Despite this challenge, she was determined and motivated. Winning the contest could allow her to represent her state at the national level and potentially advance to international competitions. The prizes included gold jewelry and complimentary beauty salon appointments. Cynthia was motivated by a desire to win and prove that she was the most beautiful in the city and the state. Her main goal was to gain influence. To prepare for the beauty contest, she tightened her diet and increased her training. Ultimately, Cynthia placed third in the competition. Despite her disappointment, she held her head high and smiled when the winner was announced. Competing at 40 years old as a mother of 7 against 20-year-olds was a significant achievement in itself. Even though she didn't win first place, her popularity grew. On June 16, 2001, multiple calls came into the police station near a gas station reporting an attack on the driver of a Ford SUV vehicle. 2 witnesses heard an explosion and saw a man, injured in the head, still alive, but struggling to breathe. Fortunately, a nearby nurse intervened, with help from another bystander, to pull the victim out of the car and provide first aid. They called emergency services and managed to keep the driver alive until paramedics arrived. The man was rushed to a medical center, where doctors did everything they could to save him. However, he tragically died just minutes after arrival. Law enforcement quickly secured the area and the vehicle. The driver's side window was shattered. The bullet entered through the cheek and exited the other side of the skull, breaking the passenger window. The deformed bullet was later discovered on the street near the car, while the cartridge case was found approximately 100 meters away from the parking lot. Witnesses, including a gas station employee, Carolyn Hyson, saw the victim arrive just before the attack. Shortly after, a motorcyclist pulled up, calmly approached the driver's side window, and attacked with weapons. Carolyn had a clear view of the criminal as he looked directly at her before he got on his motorcycle and rode away. He was a stocky man with dark hair, dressed entirely in black, resembling Ghost Rider, which seemed unusual for a summer day. However, he was wearing a helmet, so she couldn't see his face. Meanwhile, she was able to provide a detailed description of the motorcycle. It was a Street Fighter model, black and gray with neon green lights. She recalled that this distinctive man had been seen riding back and forth on the street multiple times, as if he was deliberately waiting for his target. After Carolyn reported the case at work, 2 managers ran out to the car. They were the ones who provided first aid and called an ambulance. The police quickly accessed the gas station's surveillance footage, but unfortunately, the quality was too poor to identify the attacker. They could see the motorcycle, but not its license plate. Detectives began investigating the identity of the murdered man to compile a list of potential suspects. To their surprise, they discovered that many people had negative opinions about him. Jeff was known to be difficult, hot-tempered, and often argued with neighbors over trivial matters. The investigation found that, Jeff had several problematic business relationships and was involved with married women. He also had a criminal record. In 1981, he was convicted for running an illegal escort agency in Arizona. At the store where he frequently purchased supplies for his machines, people spoke poorly of him. He was notorious for flirting with attractive female employees, many of whom were schoolgirls working part-time. One witness recounted an incident involving a 17-year-old girl whom Jeff harassed to obtain her phone number. After she reluctantly provided it, he began calling her incessantly, offering money for intimate. This harassment continued until the girl's father intervened, threatening Jeff with legal action for corrupting a minor. There were other similar incidents, which contributed to his tarnished reputation. Detectives were aware of many individuals who might seek revenge against him. When the police arrived at Jeff's family's home to inform his wife about the incident, she was shocked and started to cry. They had been married for 15 years. Although she couldn't believe what had happened, she didn't appear especially surprised, given her husband's controversial reputation and the many people who disliked him. Bonnie recounted the events of the day her husband was killed. That morning, Jeff was at home with his wife and son. He needed to go on his usual trip to check on the machines and restock them. Jeff asked his son for help, but the boy, upset with his father, refused. This prompted an argument between them, which Bonnie mentioned was a common occurrence. She herself was tired of the behavior of her husband, who treated her frankly badly. She admitted that she was thinking about divorce. Fortunately the teenager refused to help his father. It is possible that this saved his life. Typically, when disagreements arose, Jeff would react aggressively towards his son. During one instance, he attempted to involve Bonnie in an unpleasant discussion, but she chose to ignore him. He then claimed to have found a new woman who was superior to Bonnie in every way. She recognized this as another attempt to provoke her and continued to disregard his comment. To back up his claim, Jeff left the house, stating he was going to see his mistress. However, in reality, he went to wholesale warehouses to purchase items for vending machines. For several hours, he was in stores arranging merchandise, with this confirmed by witnesses and surveillance footage. The trips ended with a stop near a gas station where the killer acted quickly. There was reason to believe that Jeff was a big fan of lying. He frequently confided in a friend for the most intimate things. The police interviewed this friend, and he confirmed that Jeff tended to exaggerate his past to fit in with wealthier social circles. They also spoke with the victim's son. He supported his mother's account of a conflict with his father that morning. He struggled with mixed emotions regarding his parents. He loved his father, as they had grown closer recently. However, he was deeply troubled by his father's treatment of his mother, having witnessed years of emotional abuse and infidelity. The schoolboy really wanted to help find the killer. The numerous betrayals of Jeff seemed like a valuable clue. In addition, shortly before the massacre, Jeff deceived the contractors who were doing construction work. He paid them only about $7,000, less than the initial agreement, under a far-fetched pretext. However, these builders had a confirmed alibi. Bonnie stated that she didn't have specific suspicions about the killer, but she described Jeff as having a nasty and aggressive personality, which could lead him into trouble at any moment. She mentioned that he frequently received threatening messages and calls. One of the strange messages was saved on the answering machine, and she showed it to the police. It was received on Wednesday, June 13, at 2:55 p.m. from a man. According to Bonnie, when Jeff listened to the message, he became visibly agitated. Previously, he had taken such calls lightly, sometimes even joking about them, but this time he became restless and started pacing the room, deep in thought. Bonnie didn't know who the caller was, but she felt the voice on the recording sounded menacing. After the conversation, he said goodbye and mentioned they would speak again soon. Bonnie revealed that her husband left and went into hiding for several days after the call. He only returned home on Saturday morning, just before his death, and was in a very bad mood. The police interviewed all of Jeff's relatives and friends. Even his parents described Jeff as a swindler and a manipulator, someone unreliable, often distracted, who could also be involved in mischief and intimidation. During their investigation, officials discovered light illegal substances in Jeff's pockets, pointing to another area of inquiry. It seemed Jeff had connections to the criminal underworld, or perhaps he owed someone money, and this became the reason for the massacre. However, this line of investigation also led to no new findings. A forensic expert established more details surrounding the cause of death. The bullet entered through the right ear, damaging the oral cavity and causing severe bleeding. Within minutes, his lungs filled with blood, leading to choking. The wound itself turned out to be non-fatal. After talking to people involved with Jeff, the detectives eventually contacted the George, who had a close relationship with Jeff. They discovered that Cynthia was one of Jeff's mistresses, and their affair had lasted nearly a decade. This revelation drew significant attention during the investigation. The investigators also was revealed that Cynthia had a history of infidelity, maintaining several extramarital relationships. Before, when the detectives arrived at George's family mansion, Cynthia answered the door. She appeared disoriented, speaking slowly and in a confused manner. She claimed to already know about the murder because her husband showed her a newspaper that reported on Jeff's death on the front page. This event upset her. Cynthia was reluctant to answer many of their questions. She gave vague responses to some inquiries and ignored others altogether. Ed also responded evasively, denying any involvement of their family in the tragedy. They was clearly trying to avoid being connected to the investigation or appearing in police reports, as this could harm their reputation. Cynthia provided an alibi for both herself and Ed. Then that was verified. Surprisingly, Bonnie was fully aware of the affair between her husband and Cynthia. Jeff had informed his son about the relationship several years after it began. The reason for this disclosure was unclear. This painted a negative picture of Jeff's character. Bonnie suspected the affair as early as 1998, when she accidentally overheard a phone conversation between Jeff and Cynthia. Although she caught him being unfaithful, he managed to reassure her and deflect her concerns. Realizing she needed stronger evidence, Bonnie decided to spy on her husband and eventually confirmed her suspicions is right. By the end of 1999, Jeff confessed that he had been involved with Cynthia for 10 years. He claimed that their relationship had ended, and they were now just business partners. The mother of Jeff supported Bonnie's claims, stating that she was aware of her son's infidelities, including his involvement with Cynthia. Jeff frequently shared his personal thoughts with his mother, but she also insisted that he loved and respected Bonnie. After speaking with close friends of the George family, the police uncovered several intriguing details. Jeff met Cynthia at a club in 1991, where he pretended to be a doctor. When Cynthia discovered he was lying, he created a new story, claiming to be a special agent. This deception captivated Cynthia, a socialite. Interestingly, it was Cynthia who wrote the check to purchase the machines, not her husband. Her feelings for Jeff Stem was explained by Ed's preoccupation with work, which leaves her feeling neglected. Some suspected that Ed might have been aware of it for years. However, his strong Catholic beliefs prevented him from ending his marriage to the mother of his 7 children. Others thought he was completely unaware of the situation and blindly trusted his attractive wife. During the interrogation, the nanny shared valuable insights. She, describing Cynthia as self-centered, noted that Cynthia paid little attention to their children. She also saw Cynthia and Jeff, along with their children. She mentioned that Jeff treated his mistress similarly to how he treated his wife, including an incident where he hit Cynthia in public, leaving a bruise on her face. Additionally, it was revealed that Cynthia's youngest daughter might have been the result of an affair, as Jeff showed a lot of affection towards little girl and even took her for walks. It seemed unlikely that someone like him would invest time in another person's child. Due to these suspicions, Cynthia's youngest daughter had to undergo a DNA test, which confirmed that Jeff was indeed her father. After leaving the doctor's office with little girl, Ed stated that he didn't care about her biological parentage. He would love her, just like he loved his other children. Eventually, Cynthia admitted to having an affair with Jeff, but she kept her other secret relationships hidden. It's difficult to believe that Ed wasn't deeply troubled by his wife's infidelity at that moment. A few weeks before the murder, Ed tried to address some issues. He apparently suspected that Jeff was having an affair with Cynthia and wanted to protect her from him. However, Jeff refused the restraining order. Furthermore, Jeff's son reported that his father has shown fearful of Ed in the weeks leading up to the incident, making Ed the primary suspect. However, detectives lacked evidence to prove his involvement. Ed's alibi checked out, but this did not eliminate the possibility that he might have hired someone to commit the crime. A reward was offered for information regarding the murder. An informant, the ex-girlfriend of a man named John Zaffino, reached out to the police. She recalled that in 2001, John had mentioned beating up an Israeli. After hearing about the murder of Jeff Zach, who was identified as a former Israeli paratrooper with gray hair, she wondered if there was a connection. She contacted John, but he was evasive. It also came to light that John owned the same type of motorcycle that was seen at the scene of Jeff's murder. This prompts law enforcement to focus on the 36-year-old John, who had a reputation for being very cruel and dangerous. Immediately after, she ended the relationship because she feared for her safety. After experiencing multiple incidents of domestic violence, the woman decided to call John and asked several leading questions. Through their conversation, it became apparent that John might be involved in Jeff's death. She also engaged in several more similar phone calls, attempting to extract a confession from him, but he responded in a paranoid manner, avoiding direct answers. Upon investigating John, it was discovered that he had access to a .357 Magnum weapon, which was the same type as the Jeff's murder weapon. Interestingly, it was also confirmed by multiple witnesses that he knew Cynthia. The story is reenacted that Cynthia met John, an unemployed truck driver, in 2000, and they began an affair while she was still in a relationship with Jeff. 9 months later, in May 2001, she decided to end her relationship with Jeff and asked him to stop contacting her. However, Jeff was persistent and continued to call. Cynthia's husband noticed these unusual phone calls and suspected her. Whenever he picked up, the caller would hang up immediately. Ed did not want a public investigation and public attention to his private life, so he did nothing. Yet, he suspected that at the center of this problem was his wife's relationship with John. Details of their relationship become clearer when several expensive purchases John are discovered. John claimed he was at a car dealership about 40 minutes from the crime scene at the time of the attack. However, the investigation revealed that he was actually on a mobile phone call and his location was tracked to a gas station. He only arrived at the car dealership 2 hours later. Investigators were able to track John's geolocation and review his phone records, leading them to suspect that Cynthia had ordered the crime. Adding to the evidence, a voice analysis confirmed that a threatening phone call received by Jeff was directed at John. The police believed that Jeff had begun threatening Cynthia when she decided to end their relationship, which he strongly opposed, which was quite consistent with Jeff's temperament. Feeling threatened, Cynthia decided to take action against him. On the tragic morning following an argument with his wife and son, Jeff looked up information about Cynthia, who he was deeply infatuated with and wanted to keep. The prosecution presented a clear narrative, but there was no evidence implicating Cynthia, so only John was taken into custody. John Zaffino's trial started on February 26, 2003. When called to testify on March 7, Cynthia chose to invoke her Fifth Amendment right, which allows her to avoid self-incrimination. Ed made the same choice. The main witness for the prosecution was John's ex-girlfriend, who detailed events from John's life leading up to the murder. The investigators also provided the murder weapon and confirmed that John owned it. Ballistic tests eliminated any doubts about this connection. However, there were no eyewitnesses identifying John as the perpetrator, nor was there any DNA evidence at the crime scene, which made the prosecutor's job more challenging. On March 10, 2003, After 4 hours of deliberation, John Zaffino was convicted of conspiracy to commit murder. He was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole. 23 years after the verdict, Bonnie approached John, stating that he was merely a pawn while Cynthia enjoyed a lavish lifestyle, asked if it was worth it. She likely hoped John would express his anger and reveal the truth, but he chose to remain silent. For a long time, the police lacked solid evidence against Cynthia. To bring her to justice, they gathered information about her involvement, piece by piece. On January 10, 2005, Cynthia was arrested while shopping. Ed posted bail of $2 million, allowing her to remain at home until her trial began in November 2005. The case gained momentum when new evidence emerged. Investigators discovered that John had planned to attack Jeff on May 8 while Jeff was relaxing in a national park. During this time, John was on a bridge talking on the phone with Cynthia for about 3 hours. She was also on another call with Jeff, coordinating their actions. The attack was interrupted when a park ranger noticed John's weapon case. When questioned, John claimed this was a misunderstanding and waiting for his girlfriend. A week later, a mushroom picker found a weapon in the park, which provided indirect evidence of Cynthia's involvement in the conspiracy. Ed hired a strong defense team of 5 lawyers for his wife, significantly reducing the prosecution's chances of success. During the trial, many revealing details emerged about Cynthia and her affair with John. The investigators was noted that Cynthia even paid for John's lawyers. One significant piece of evidence included recorded phone conversations between John and his sisters, which featured incriminating remarks in which he pressured Cynthia to uphold her part of their agreement. The defense argued that Cynthia had no reason to want Jeff dead and no motive to be involved in a murder plot. In contrast, the prosecution firmly claimed that Cynthia had a motive for the murder. After their breakup, Jeff tried to keep Cynthia in his life. They frequently argued, especially concerning their daughter, whom he threatened to take with him to Israel. Cynthia also felt at risk of their affair being revealed by Jeff, which could lead to her public humiliation. During the trial, 2 letters from Cynthia to John, who was in prison, were presented. These letters revealed their ongoing romantic relationship and showed that she remained deeply connected to him. In one letter, she sent him a Bible and expressed that she frequently prays for him. After facing public humiliation due to Cynthia's actions, Ed defended her against conspiracy charges. He emphasized his commitment to their marriage vows and refused to seek a divorce. Surprisingly, Cynthia chose not to testify in her defense, and John also did not take the stand. Ultimately, Cynthia was found guilty of conspiracy to commit murder and received, with the possibility of parole in a year. After the trial, Ed continued to defend his wife. He hired new lawyers who filed an appeal on her behalf. Cynthia served 16 months before she was released on March 22 after Ohio's 9th District Court of Appeals ruled that the circumstantial evidence presented by prosecutors, including phone records, correspondence, and financial documents, was insufficient to prove her guilty. Cynthia continues to live a normal life now. Welcome back to our channel. Today, we will explore a new case, the case of Nohima Graber. When a student at Fairfield High School received his Spanish test results, he found that his entire exam had been marked in red pen. He had failed because received a low grade. He was furious in front of his classmates, but the teacher reassured him, stating that she believed in his abilities and that he just needed to prepare better for the next test. Little did the elderly woman know that this would later have a tragic effect on her life. Fairfield is a small, quiet town in the southeastern part of the state of Quince, with a population of around 99,000 people. It features beautiful architecture and has about 12 parks and recreational areas, which is a significant number for a town of its size. One of these parks was a favorite walking spot for teacher Nohima Graber. She followed a daily routine of taking a certain number of steps to stay active and maintain her health, enjoying the tranquility and beauty of nature. However, on November 2, 2021, after finishing her workday, Nohima was tragically killed, leaving the residents of Fairfield in shock and fear. What a devastating event for their once peaceful town. Nohema was born on November 10, 1954, in Jalapa, Mexico, where she grew up in a loving family. From a young age, she was known for her openness and kindness. At the age of 20, Nohema began her career as a flight attendant for a major Mexican airline, which allowed her to indulge her passion for travel and an active lifestyle. She became one of the first women in Mexico to train as a pilot, paving the way for future female pilots in this challenging yet prestigious field. In 1985, at the age of 31, Nohema met Paul Graber, who was visiting Mexico on a business trip. They first encountered each other at a nightclub. After their meeting, Paul received Nohema's phone number and called her a few days later. Initially, he thought she was ignoring him, but she agreed to go on a date. Their relationship quickly blossomed into a romance. After a year of dating, on October 4, 1986, Nohema and Paul got married in Mexico. They then settled in Nohema's hometown, where she continued her work in the airline industry while Paul found a job in this new country. In 1991, after 5 years of marriage, the Graber family welcomed their first child, a son named Christian. A year later, they had another son, Jareth. Nohema, who was 37 and had worked for 17 years, decided to focus on her family. During the 1990s, the area where they lived became increasingly dangerous, prompting they to make the significant decision to leave Mexico and move to America, Paul's homeland. In 1992, they settled in Fairfield, where Paul found a well-paying job and supported the family while Nohema became a stay-at-home mom. Soon after, she gave birth to their daughter, Naima. Nohema quickly adapted to life in the U.S. and began attending St. Mary's Catholic Church, where she made a donation and eventually became a community leader. As time went on, their children grew up and began to move out, leaving Nohema feeling bored and lacking purpose. Once she turned 50, she decided to pursue further education and enrolled at Westland University in Mount Plant, Iowa. There, she earned a degree in English and a teaching certificate. Nohema then secured a job at a high school in Atashtat, Iowa, where she taught Spanish for several years, gaining valuable experience. In 2012, Nohema began teaching at Fairfield High School. Her students and colleagues appreciated her greatly, often speaking of her fondly. Graduates would send her postcards and letters, and she made it a point to respond, and always ending her replies with her signature message, "Be more confident." On November 2, 2021, after school, Nohema drove to the park. She was active and enjoyed walking, but that day she did not return home. Her husband, Paul, grew concerned when she didn't answer his calls. He went to the park and searched their usual spots, but he was unable to find her anywhere, and her car, a blue 1997 Honda Odyssey, was also missing. Feeling anxious, Paul promptly contacted the police to report. Right away, a search began in the park for Nohema. Her colleagues reported that she had not shown up for work, and since the previous evening, she had stopped responding to calls and messages. Meanwhile, students contacted the police with information about their classmate. They revealed that the night before, he had shared disturbing photos on social network. These photos were sent by Jeremy Goodale, a 16-year-old student at Fairfield High School. Born in 2005, Jeremy grew up in a dysfunctional family with 4 older siblings. His parents frequently argued and were often absent, leaving the older children to care for the younger ones. Eventually, the parents divorced. The mother moved in with another man, leaving her children behind to live with their father in the family home. The living conditions in the house were chaotic. It was filled with dirt and dust, flies buzzed around, and the bed linens had gone unchanged for months. They washed only once a week. The children lacked female care and love, so looked unkempt. Jeremy was described by his classmates as a quiet and modest boy who played on a baseball team. He didn't stand out much, except for his messy appearance. However, Jeremy faced more serious issues. He struggled with depression, anxiety, and attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Doctors prescribed him medication to help. He studied Spanish with a teacher named Nohima, and his best friend was Willard Miller. Unlike Jeremy, Willard came from a wealthy family, but he found school challenging, particularly with foreign languages. Willard had recently transferred to Fairfield High School after attending a prestigious school with a tougher curriculum. On November 3, the body of Nohima was discovered near the railway in the north. She was lying on the ground wrapped in a tarpaulin, covered with old sleepers, various garbage, branches, and leaves. At the time of the discovery, she had died many hours ago. An initial examination revealed that Nohima died from blunt force trauma to the head. What does that mean? Her death was a homicide, and that her body had been deliberately concealed. Witnesses reported seeing Nohima's Honda Odyssey leave the park around 5:00 p.m. She had spent approximately 45 minutes there. However, the witnesses could not identify or describe the actual driver. Shortly afterward, the police found her blue Honda abandoned on a country road south of where her body was located. Another witness later came forward, stating they saw two young men walking along this same road around 5:30 p.m., heading back to the park. One of them was pushing an old garden wheelbarrow. Unfortunately, this witness could not describe the young men and did not remember their faces. Based on the suspicious photo that went viral, the police arrived at Jeremy's house. He seemed agitated. Although he knew that the teacher was missing, he was unaware that her body had already been discovered. He denied any involvement in her disappearance, but was not informed about what the police had found at his home. Detectives discovered a blood-stained baseball bat and several black hairs in his house. They also found clothes and a blood-stained terry towel belonging to him. On Jeremy's phone, they found a text file titled "Preparation," which detailed the items needed for a planned act, including rubber gloves, wet wipes, a backpack, a bag, a blanket, a garden wheelbarrow, and other supplies. The file also outlined a step-by-step plan of actions. After the officers finished inspecting Jeremy's house, they proceeded to Willard's home. At that time, Willard, like Jeremy, was unaware that their teacher had already been found dead. Willard remained calm during the police questioning and readily discussed how he and Jeremy had walked in the local park the previous evening. However, he became visibly nervous when the conversation shifted to Nohima. His demeanor changed as he mentioned that Nohima did not regard him highly and often underestimated him. Meanwhile, the community of Fairfield was shocked and mourned the passing of Nohima, as she was known to be kind, compassionate, and always helpful to her students, leaving everyone puzzled about why anyone would want to harm her. After searches of the houses, Jeremy Gudella and Willard Miller were arrested and taken into custody on suspicion of murdering their Spanish language teacher. During their interrogation, they were informed that the body had been discovered. Both provided similar accounts of the events. They admitted to walking in the park that afternoon when they encountered their teacher. They greeted her, but suddenly, a group of masked individuals attacked Nohima, hitting her on the head with a bat, causing her to lose consciousness and fall. Jeremy and Willard claimed they were forced to watch as the assailants continued to assault her. They alleged that they were then told to hide the body, take her car, and abandon it near a country road. Jeremy and Willard denied any wrongdoing, asserting that they were merely witnesses to the murder and had been compelled to obey the orders of the true criminals. However, evidence found in Jeremy's house suggested otherwise. The blood and hair found on the baseball bat, as well as the blood on Jeremy's clothes and towel, all belonged to Nohima. Furthermore, there were no witnesses who saw a group of masked individuals or any strangers in the park. A notebook discovered in Jeremy's house revealed that he and his friends had been stalking Nohima for several weeks. They recorded the times her classes ended, when she left school, how long she spent in her car, and where she went afterward. This detailed documentation of Nohima's schedule indicated that it was easy for them to predict her daily movements. The young men knew that Nohima walked in the park every day and were familiar with this route. They chose the right moment to attack Nohima while she was walking alone on a dark, deserted street. During questioning, Willard admitted that he disliked Nohima because he felt she always underestimated him. He acknowledged that he frequently argued with her during class, and his classmates had witnessed these confrontations. These two young men told conflicting stories. This time, Jeremy accused Willard of hitting Nohima, while Willard insisted he had not touched her, claiming that it was Jeremy who had killed her. During the investigation, the investigators was uncovered that on the day of the incident, Jeremy and Willard went to a park and concealed themselves in an out-of-the-way spot while they waited. When Nohima arrived, one of them struck her on the head with a bat, causing her to lose consciousness and collapse. The two then dragged her off the path and took turns assaulting her until she died. Afterward, they covered her body with branches and leaves before fleeing the scene in her car, which they abandoned on a country road. While walking, they made their way to Willard's house, where they took a garden wheelbarrow, a shovel, and a tarpaulin. They returned to the crime scene, wrapped the victim in the tarpaulin, placed her in the wheelbarrow, and transported her to the railroad tracks. There, they concealed the body by placing old railway sleepers, garbage, branches, and fallen leaves on top. Once the body was hidden, Jeremy and Willard returned home and attempted to clean up any evidence of their crime, believing they would never be discovered. Detectives discovered unusual search queries on Willard's phone, including, "Do students receive credit for a lesson if a teacher is seriously injured or dies during a course?" And, "What happens to students' work if a teacher dies mid-course?" Before the incident, Willard had planned a trip to Spain, but after receiving a low grade on a test, that trip became uncertain. Prosecutors viewed Willard as the main instigator of the crime, driven by a desire for revenge against the teacher, while his friend Jeremy appeared to be following Willard's lead. Additionally, Jeremy struggled with depression and anxiety, which made him emotionally vulnerable and easier to manipulate. This made him a more suitable accomplice for Willard's malicious scheme. During his trial in December 2021, Jeremy pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and agreed to testify against Willard. In his testimony, Jeremy claimed that Willard was the first to attack their teacher, Nohima Graber, on the afternoon of November 2, 2021, when they both invited her out. He stated that Willard pushed her, causing her to fall and sustain serious injuries. However, Jeremy also confessed that after Nohima lost consciousness, he used a baseball bat to strike her multiple times, resulting in her death. Jeremy claimed that he and Willard beat her together to ensure that Nohima would not survive. Throughout the trial, Jeremy continually cried and asked for forgiveness from the family of the deceased. He expressed deep remorse for what had happened. Willard also admitted his guilt, but maintained that Jeremy had delivered the first blow. In court, Willard was more composed. Like Jeremy, he sought forgiveness from the Graber family. He said, "I am truly sorry for the pain I caused you. I regret that your family is suffering because of me. I sincerely apologize from the bottom of my heart. I fully recognize the seriousness of my actions. I know I was wrong." Willard Miller was the first to be sentenced in June 2023, receiving a life sentence with the possibility of parole after 35 years. Sadly, another tragic event occurred following this story. Nohima's husband, Paul Graber, passed away in June 2023 from terminal cancer. Paul, 68, was buried the day before Willard's verdict was announced, and he never saw his wife's killers face justice. Paul's family and friends reported that he was deeply affected by his wife's death. They believed that if Nohima had been alive, She would have noticed Paul's illness early and sought timely treatment, which might have saved his life. In November 2023, Jeremy Goodale was found guilty in connection with the case of Nohema and sentenced to life in prison, with the possibility of parole after 25 years. During the trial, Jeremy was so distraught that he experienced a nosebleed and cried. He expressed regret, saying, "I wish I could turn back time to prevent this loss and the pain I caused the family. It was the worst decision of my life, and I take full responsibility for what I did." Nohema Graber had 3 adult children, brothers, sisters, nephews, and nieces, who certainly miss their beloved and caring mother. They fondly remember their mother and father. It is known that the sons and daughter forgave the murderers and try not to remember them. After their mother's death, one of the sons found their mother's personal diary. In it, she wrote short notes about her life, expressing that she loved teaching and adored her students very much. Nohema wrote that she would always smile and give her students support, stating that even if she could not teach them anything new, just looking at her would help the students learn to love life. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case, the case of Aaron Barley. Kindness is not just a gift given, but sometimes also a double-edged sword if misplaced. When compassion is betrayed, will what we give become the seeds of a tragedy? Peter Wilkinson, 47, and his wife, Tracy, 50, lived in Stourbridge, in the English county of Westminster. They had 2 children, a daughter, Lydia, who studied biology at Bristol University, and a son, Pierce, who was 13. Despite the fact that Lydia was much older and studying at university, away from the family, the brother and sister communicated every day and shared an extremely close relationship. Tracy Wilkinson was a generous and compassionate woman. A former Latin American champion in ballroom dancing, she became a volunteer to work with elderly people and could talk to anyone to make them feel at ease. She often helped the homeless and never refused to assist those in need. Tracy was a housewife while her husband had his own business. One day in March 2016, Tracy went to the supermarket to do her weekly shopping. After leaving, she noticed a young man named Aaron Barley who was sleeping on the street in a cardboard box. Seeing how he suffered from his situation, Tracy felt sorry for him and decided to invite him to her home on Greyhound Lane. Aaron had dinner with the Wilkinson family, and Tracy decided to do everything in her power to help him get back on his feet. She took Aaron to the city council office, and with their help, he managed to find new housing in a hostel. From that moment, Tracy always tried to ensure that Aaron had hot and fresh food. Such care and concern were extremely rare for Aaron, as his life had been chaotic from the very beginning. Born in 1993 as a result of incest, his parents were his uncle and niece, with a 19-year age difference. His mother worked in a factory, and his father was an innkeeper. By the age of 10, Aaron became an orphan. His father died of cancer when he was 4, and 2 years later, his mother had a heart attack, leading him to spend his entire childhood in orphanages and various foster families. During this period, he faced violence. When Aaron was 13 years old, he is at the center of an investigation into a missing person case, and his photo was circulated in the media after he went missing, with 2 boys in Bromsgrove. Luckily, he was found and received proper medical care. As Aaron got older, he started sleeping on the streets. He also became addicted to banned substance and alcohol. However, it seemed that after meeting Tracy, his life started to improve. He appeared grateful for the help and support. Meanwhile, the Wilkinson family decided to do whatever it took to help him get through life as hard. One day during dinner with Wilkinson family, Aaron said that he just needed someone to give him a chance. Tracy herself has struggled with alcoholism in the past and was now volunteering at a rehab center that had helped her overcome it. She knew from her own experience how debilitating addiction could be and wanted to do everything she could to help him. Peter decided to get Aaron a job as a laborer at one of his businesses in Newport. For 5 months, it seemed that Aaron's life was getting better. He had a steady income, a roof over his head, and a family that truly cared about him. But soon, everything fell apart. In September, Aaron relapsed and started using illegal substances again. He explained that the reason was because his mother had recently passed away, but this was a complete lie. He became constantly drunk, stopped showing up for work on time, and exhibited aggression towards other employees. Peter decided to fire him. Everything ended peacefully, and the Wilkinson family lost contact with him. After only a couple of months, Peter found Aaron sleeping next to their house, covered in bruises, which indicated that he had been attacked. They decided to give Aaron another chance, helped him find a new place to live, and he earned money doing odd jobs for them. He spent Christmas with them and gave Tracy a card signed, "For the mother I never had." For the new year, Aaron had a new flat in Briarley Hill, and he now had a full-time job. A couple of times a week, he had dinner with the Wilkinson family, and it seemed that everything was getting better. Unfortunately, soon after, Aaron was fired from his job as a furniture polisher, and he lost his home. The Wilkinsons allowed him to stay with them again for 2 weeks until he found a job. On March 26, 2017, Lydia returned home from university and surprised her mother by hiding in the family Land Rover for Mother's Day. When Tracy opened the trunk and saw Lydia, they both cried tears of joy at their reunion. What a pity, Lydia's visit was brief, as she soon had to leave for Bristol to continue her studies. Just 4 days later, on March 30, 2017, at around 10:00 a.m., Lydia received a distressing call from her boyfriend informing her that a crime had occurred in her hometown. Upon reading the news, Lydia saw images of her house surrounded by police tape and emergency services. Alarmed, she immediately contacted the police to learn what had happened, and the news she received was horrifying. That day, Peter had taken his greyhound, Mendy, for their usual morning walk, leaving Tracy and Pierce at home. He had invited Pierce to join him, but Pierce declined, saying he would walk later. When Peter returned home, he noticed the house was unusually quiet, and there was no tea on the kitchen table, a routine his wife usually followed. As Peter entered the house, a man wearing a balaclava attacked him from behind the kitchen wall, raising a knife over his head. Peter suffered 6 stab wounds, 2 in his back, 2 in his stomach, and 2 in his face. During the assault, the attacker screamed, "Die," and curse. Although the attacker was trying to conceal his identity with the mask, Peter instantly recognized him. After the first stab, Peter pleaded, "We are trying to help you." But he responded with increasing rage, then shouting again, "Die," as he delivered another blow to Peter's stomach. Following the attack, Aaron stole the Wilkinsons' Land Rover parked outside and drove away. Despite serious injuries, Peter managed to call 911 and made his way to the garden, collapsing on a chair. Emergency services arrived in just 7 minutes. 2 ambulances and 2 helicopters were dispatched to quickly take the victims to hospital. When the police and medical staff arrived, they encountered a horrific scene inside the house. Peter directed them to Tracy and Pierce to check on their well-being. Police comments: Tracy had been stabbed at least 17 times and was found naked in her bedroom under a duvet, indicating she had been attacked while she was sleeping. She was pronounced dead at the crime scene. Her son, Pierce, suffered 8 stab wounds, one of which was so severe that it nearly ruptured his back. He was found gasping for air on the floor. Right away, Peter and Pierce was rushed to Birmingham for medical attention, but sadly, Peter lost both his wife and son. After police tracked the Wilkinson family's car, they quickly located Aaron, so he was quickly apprehended. Why? A bloody knife wrapped in a wet shirt was also discovered in the car. For Lydia, the unfolding nightmare was unimaginable. She had planned to return home the following day to choose a dress for the university ball and had promised Pierce she would pick him up from school. Now, all those plans would never come to fruition. As soon as she arrived in her hometown, she went directly to her father before his life-saving surgery. Seeing him in the hospital, surrounded by medical equipment and tubes, was heartbreaking. While Peter fought for his life, Lydia had the painful task of identifying the bodies of her younger brother and mother. Lydia recalled, "I went into the house and sat with my mom and brother. I told them I was sorry I couldn't protect them and stroked their hair. I decided to stay there for a while because I knew it would be the last time I would see them." After the doctor's efforts, Peter survived and spent a total of 11 days in the hospital, 6 of which were in intensive care. The community in Stone Bridge was shocked by such a horrific event in their town. In a show of respect, flowers were placed around Wilkinson's house. Many people came to express their sorrow. Meanwhile, the police obtained surveillance camera footage from Wilkinson's house, revealing a disturbing sequence of events. The footage showed Aaron climbing over the fence into the garden behind the house. He had been hiding in the garden shed all night after failing to break into the house. In the morning, he waited for Peter to leave for his usual walk, then crawled into the house on all fours to avoid detection. Once inside, he put on a balaclava to conceal his identity, took 2 knives from the kitchen, and went upstairs. There, he brutally stabbed Tracy multiple times in her bed and did the same to Pierce. After the attack, he hid to waiting for Peter to return. After the murder, Aaron showed no remorse. He told a police officer, "I stabbed 3 people. I didn't even bother to take any of you." He also mentioned to the police officer that he had chopped them all up and insisted he wouldn't require a lawyer. Additionally, Aaron declined to take a toxicology test that could have established if he was under the influence of banned substance that morning. He also refused to explain his motives. While in custody, he boasted about killing a mother and her son, and expressed satisfaction that they were dead. His only regret was failing to kill Peter. One uncertainty is why he committed this crime. Less than a week before the murder, the Wilkinson family ended their contract with Aaron's phone service because he hadn't contacted them for 3 weeks. Tracy had also mentioned to friends that she saw Aaron peering over their garden fence and had wished for his disappearance from their lives. Investigators said, Aaron has a long history of violent and antisocial behavior. At the age of 11, he was abandoned by his foster family because of his aggressive actions towards other children. As he grew older, his violence escalated, particularly towards residents in the nursing home where he lived, and he claimed to be very disturbed. He frequently got into fights and even stole a staff member's car. At one point, he made a list of people he wanted to kill. Aaron has 21 prior convictions, the first occurring when he was just 12 years old for causing serious injury. His other offenses include assaulting a police officer, using illegal banned substance, and possessing illegal weapons. He once attacked his ex-girlfriend with a piece of wood, hitting her 50 times, and attempted to stab her after she broke the wood in half. For this assault, he was sentenced to 3 years in prison at the age of 18. Volunteers at the rehabilitation center where Aaron was held reported that he expressed a desire to kill someone with a knife. They also noted that he had 2 main goals: to kill a prison officer and to kill a police officer. However, his comments were largely dismissed since they believed he made these statements while under the influence of illegal banned substance. Before, he attended a special school, but his social interactions were limited, as everyone who knew him avoided him. Additionally, a police report was filed against him after his former foster guardian became alarmed by his Facebook posts. In one of these posts, he threatened his former family, with whom he claimed he hadn't spoken in years, and expressed a desire for specialized help, warning that he might commit mass murder if he didn't receive it. In February 2017, just a month before he murdered the Wilkinson family, he met with a project employee for support. This employee concluded that Aaron sought to manipulate the people around him and to have absolute control over them, calculating every step he took. In one of his text messages, Aaron wrote that he was a beast, adding, "Stay a beast, change the victim." On Wednesday, June 7, 2017, Pierce and Tracy Wilkinson's funeral was held at St. Mary's Church. Lydia and Peter decided to bury both of their loved ones in the same coffin. The priest who presided over the ceremony was moved to say, "You may be surprised to see only one coffin, but they are forever inseparable, just as they were together when they were alive. On the first day of his trial at Birmingham Crown Court, Aaron pleaded guilty to 2 counts of murder and 1 count of attempted murder. As the judge read the charges against him, Aaron rocked back and forth in the dock and shouted, "I did what I did. I don't have to stand here and lie." Psychiatric evaluations found no grounds for mitigating Aaron Barley's guilt. Prosecutor Kareem Khalil described Aaron as deceitful and manipulative. One of Aaron's former caregivers noted that he could be sensitive and caring, but he could also be cruel and threatening. A former resident of the nursing home where Aaron lived said that, aside from anger, he rarely showed any emotion. They never saw Aaron cry and noted that he rarely seemed affected by anything that happened around him. They observed that Aaron was the type of person who could witness terrible things happening and still stand still, not crying, not worrying. He seemed physically present, but completely detached emotionally. Aaron's attorney argued that Aaron's childhood was unstable, preventing him from staying in one place for long. He claimed that Aaron had borderline personality disorder and felt abandoned by his family. However, this diagnosis was never confirmed because it was widely acknowledged that the Wilkinson family had treated him with exceptional kindness. In court, Lydia Wilkinson confronted Aaron, stating, "My parents helped you, and you repay them with emotional suffering. You ruined lives and took half of my family away. I have become a shadow of my former self. Sometimes I wake up wishing I wasn't here. What did they do to deserve such a fate?" She also expressed that she would never forgive Aaron for his actions. After her statement, it appeared that Aaron began to cry and softly said, "And I'm very sorry." The judge commended Lydia for her courage and maturity, noting that she had shown strength beyond her years. However, he pointed out that Lydia was struggling with anxiety attacks and could no longer be left alone. Peter, who also testified, expressed confusion about Aaron's actions, saying, "We have no explanation for what he did. He chose to take out his frustrations on the people who cared for him. I wish I had never met him. I wish my wife hadn't seen him in the cardboard box." Aaron Barley was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum of 30 years before he would be eligible for parole. While the judge gave him this opportunity, she also warned him that Aaron might never be released, depending entirely on his behavior and rehabilitation while serving his sentence. However, Aaron remained expressionless throughout the trial, showing no reaction. The 3-judge panel then decided to increase the minimum sentence to 35 years, reflecting the severity of Aaron's crimes. Now, Aaron will only be eligible for parole after serving at least 35 years and proving that he is no longer a threat to society. Whether or not he will ever be free is a question that only time will tell. Peter and Lydia continued to live in their home on Greyhound Lane. Peter said, "This is our home, and we couldn't let him take anything else away from us. We love this house. It's like a family home that we built ourselves, and we love living here." They also received support from a local priest, who blessed each room in the house. Lydia returned to university with the hope of becoming a medical researcher. She said she wanted to continue the work her mother would do, helping and supporting others, and that it was important to her to focus her energy on making something positive out of the tragedy. Lydia raised £133,000 British pounds for Birmingham Children's Hospital, which fought so hard to save her brother's life. While the loss of Tracy and Pierce can never be replaced, but their legacy will live on through the children that Lydia's organizations have cared for. Welcome back to our channel. Today we will explore a new case. The case of Debany Escobar. These events took place in the state of Nuevo León, Mexico, on April 9, 2022. A disturbing image appeared on social media. In the photo, a young girl was standing on the side of the road. She was wearing a white top, brown shorts, and black Converse shoes, and her hair was down. The caption of the post with the photo said, "Yes, it's true." The girl's name was Debany Escobar. She was 18 years old. The last time she was seen was late on the night of April 9 after a party where she was with her friends. It all started on Friday, April 8, when Debani, a student at the Faculty of Law at the University of Nuevo León in Monterrey, decided to go for a walk with her friends. At about 11 p.m., she left her house. Two of her friends, Sarai and Vaughn, met her on Simon Bolivar Street to go to a party together. At 11:30 p.m., a CCTV camera from one of the stores recorded how the three girls were buying drinks. They were there for some time and then decided to go to the party just a few blocks away. However, upon arrival, they found themselves in an unpleasant situation, which led them to decide to go to another party taking place at the Quinta Diamante estate in General Escobedo. They ordered a taxi using the Didi app, which came to pick them up at 12:49 a.m. When they arrived at the location, it became clear that the party had already ended. However, the girls noticed that not far away, on the same street, another party was taking place, called Cantal Diamant. The surveillance Sierra footage shows the girls getting out of a white Kia Rio at 1:20 a.m. And only Sarai and Debani exited the car. A little later, they reached the entrance to the club. After 9 minutes, the camera filmed Debani walking in the opposite direction from the entrance. After a few seconds, she returned and everything seemed fine. But at 3:45 a.m., the camera recorded Debani running out of the club. A young man ran after her and tried to grab her. She hit him and tried to run away, but he did not let her. After that, they began to quarrel, and another guy came out to witness the altercation. After that, the girls called a familiar driver to pick them up. The driver informed her that he was nearby and would arrive in 10 or 15 minutes. A moment later, when the driver arrived, Debani got in the car, leaving her friends behind. Another camera recorded the car, showing that Debani was arguing with the driver. 8 minutes later, the driver sent a message to her friend stating that Debani had exited the car and refused to continue the ride. The driver informed that there had been an argument between him and Debani, due to which she chose to leave the car and did not want to return. He took the photo as proof that he left her on the side of the road. Debani's friends were uncertain about what to do next. They asked the driver to contact the police, but he declined, stating he had to leave for work. A few minutes later, he returned to the area, but Debani was no longer there. He informed her friends that she was missing and suggested that Debani appeared to be in poor condition, potentially under the influence of banned substance, as her speech was incoherent. The friends attempted to contact her parents, but no one answered. The conversation between the driver and Debani's friends ended at 5:16 a.m., and since then, they had not heard from her. The next day, Debani's friends were able to contact her father, Mario Escobar, they wanting to find out what had happened. Her parents were also unaware of the situation, and they promptly filed a report with the police. Photos of Debani were shared on social media, and a search effort began. On April 9, while authorities were looking for Debani, the body of a missing girl named Maria Fernanda Contreras was discovered in a house in the Apodaca area. This was one of 5 bodies found during the search for Debani. Within just 6 days, the remains of these 5 women were uncovered, which left the community in shock. 2 days after Debani went missing, a girl who was also at the party that Debani attended told on her Instagram that some people tried to help Debani and offered to take her home so that she could come to her senses. However, Debani's friend did not want this, since supposedly some trusted person was supposed to come for them, so the story took on a different character. Now Debani's friends were the main suspects. All this was very strange, and as time went on, the case became more and more complicated. At that point, the investigation had made little progress. On April 15, a reward of 100,000 Mexican pesos was announced for information about Debani. From this reward, the prosecutor's office in Nuevo León obtained a video showing Debani at 4:29 a.m., just 4 minutes after the driver had photographed her. In the video, she is seen walking toward the building of the international transport company Alcocia. She then crossed the road and approached the building's facade and vanished. With access to this video, it was believed that Debani might have gone to the transport company for help. However, the camera did not capture her entering or exiting the building. This was the last footage of Dabani, leading to suspicions that the transport company could be involved in her disappearance. So, there was still hope of finding Dabani alive. On April 19, the police initiated a search of the Alcocia Company building. They examined all vehicles and accessed surveillance cameras, but found nothing of interest. Following this, they conducted a search in a residential building in central Monterrey, located 22 kilometers from where Dabani was last seen. The police received tips that Dabani's personal belongings were in apartment number 18. 2 days earlier, the GPS on her phone indicated activity in that location, as well as at the corner of the Nueva Castilla motel. The following day, police, volunteers, and canine units searched the nearby highway for evidence. They inspected a manhole in a vacant lot next to the Nueva Castilla motel. Additionally, workers from the Monterrey Water Service searched a manhole along the highway where she was last seen. However, at that point, the investigation had made little progress. At the request of Mario, a team from the National Search Commission was called in to assist with the search. That Thursday afternoon, a group of volunteers joined the effort. Police received reports from the staff at the Nueva Castilla motel about a foul odor coming from an unused tank. Officers quickly arrived at the scene, and within minutes, they discovered a body. Although it was initially unclear if the body belonged to Dabani, divers confirmed that it was wearing the same clothes she had on the day she went missing. Mario identified her by a cross she was wearing. The police also requested security camera footage from the motel, but the staff claimed the cameras only displayed live footage and did not record. Meanwhile, Dabani's body had been submerged in water for nearly 2 weeks, making it nearly unrecognizable and in a state of decomposition. Despite the clothing and accessories, DNA testing was necessary for identification. An autopsy conducted confirmed that the body was indeed Dabani's, and the cause of death was determined to be a severe head injury by strong impact. Initial reports suggested that Dabani's fall into the tank was not accidental, and her phone lost signal shortly after. There were no signs of violence on her body. The bruises might have been caused by a fall. However, there was swelling on her forehead and around her eyes, indicating inflammation from impact. At that time, it was believed that Dabani could not have jumped over the 2-meter-high wall surrounding the motel to accidentally fall into a cistern that measured 90 by 98 centimeters and was 4.43 meters deep, with a water level of 90 centimeters. Because Dabani was only 167 centimeters tall and the wall had barbed wire on top. Before the discovery, Dabani's body, no one, including service dogs, noticed any unpleasant odors at the motel. Nueva Castilla had 3 tanks, with one of them clogged. In the first tank, where the body was found, they found her Converse sneakers and a piece of fabric with insects typically found on decomposing bodies. On the wall between the first and second tanks, a bag belonging to Dabani was located. This bag contained a red plastic container, a white bra, 2 pieces of beige fabric, and a black and white fabric mask. In the second tank, investigators found a yellow and white lighter, 3 metal keys, a cell phone in a damaged black case, a wallet, and a plastic-wrapped gel-like substance. Conducting toxicology tests to check for alcohol or other substances in her system proved difficult. However, the presence of insects and worms feeding on the corpse might allow for DNA extraction to identify substances. The investigation agency analyzed that Nueva Castilla motel is not well known and appears abandoned from the outside. It sits along the highway leading to New Laredo, the main route between Monterrey and the United States. This highway has earned a reputation for danger, as approximately 1,000 people went missing there last year. They found no signs of a break-in near the tanks, leading them to conclude that Dabani likely entered the motel through the main entrance of the restaurant. 2 days after the body was found, security camera footage from the motel was released. This was unusual because the staff had previously stated that the cameras only recorded in real time. The footage provided by the prosecutor's office shows the motel's restaurant and 2 glass doors, one facing the highway and the other leading to the tank area inside the motel. In the footage, Debani is seen entering the motel at 4:33 a.m. Another camera captures her running to the motel, going around the restaurant, and reaching the glass door. When she noticed no one was there, she dashed to the corner of the restaurant, where she stayed for about 20 minutes. Then, she ran again along the wall of the hotel. This was the last confirmed sighting of her alive. Following a review of the surveillance footage, the prosecutor's office requested that the motel be placed under check. Investigators discovered that an outdoor camera at a neighboring restaurant recorded a car parked at the Nueva Castilla motel, where a man entered. They was believed that this man took Debani away in that car. Days later, the car was identified, and the man who got in was also revealed. However, after being questioned, he was declared innocent of the case. Meanwhile, Mario sought external assistance to carry out a second autopsy and compare its findings with those of the first. Everyone was left wondering why Debani exited the taxi that was supposed to take her home. New footage that surfaced in the media suggested that her departure might have been prompted by harassment from the taxi driver. In the video, the driver is seen extending his right hand toward the girl's chest, leading to speculation that she left the car due to his inappropriate behavior. In response to these allegations, taxi driver Juan appeared in the media on April 27 to share his side of the story. In the interview, Juan David denied any harassment, explaining that the footage actually captured him handing Debani a phone charger because her phone battery had died. And he said his conversations with Debani's friend, he shared an audio recording he made while Debani was in his car. In the recording, she states, "My parents deserve the truth." Juan explained that she got into the car because she felt her friends from the party were bad influences. They didn't want to see her off. Debani started crying, and Juan noted that she appeared to be in distress, possibly under the influence of banned substance, as her speech was unclear. He mentioned that, when he requested her home address to take her there, but she didn't respond. He then asked her friend for Debani's mother's phone number, but they didn't have one. While driving on the highway, Debani unexpectedly asked him to stop the car and then exited. Juan tried to persuade her to return while she stood by the roadside, but she did not come back. Then, he took a photo of Debani and sent it to Debani's friends to alert them to her location. Two of Debani's friends also gave an interview on television. The girls mentioned that at the party, Debani was aggressive and did not accept help from anyone. She asked to be left alone. Sarai learned that Debani had a disagreement with a group of people who wanted to take her home, which caused her to act oddly. Her friends suspected that something was wrong with her drink at the party, leading to her withdrawal from socializing with others. Eventually, she ran out of the club, and some guys tried to stop her. Others also came out to assist Debani, but she reacted aggressively and insisted that they leave her alone. She mentioned that her parents were lawyers and offered money to anyone who would let her be. The girls ordered a taxi, using the same driver they had trusted before. When the taxi arrived, only Debani got in, while this driver is different from the driver they want to see again. After leaving the party, the girls attempted to call Debani's father multiple times between 3:50 a.m. and 4:30 a.m., but he did not answer. It wasn't until 8:35 a.m. that they finally reached him to ask if Debani had made it home, only to discover that she was missing. One significant piece of evidence that prompted further investigation was a promotional video from the motel, which featured a song. The video not only showcased the motel, but also zoomed in on room 174. This raised suspicions that a motel worker might have been hinting at what happened in that room. As a result, the initial search lasted about 7 hours and yielded some evidence, along with previously overlooked surveillance footage. At the request of Debani's parents, room 174 was examined for blood traces, both inside the room and in the parking lot. The prosecutor's office announced that 5 individuals present at the motel that night have already been interviewed. A white truck was noted to have arrived shortly after Debani entered the hotel grounds. However, the last 8 or 9 minutes of the footage were missing, and they might contain crucial clues for solving the case. Experts are currently working to recover the potentially deleted records. On May 5, it was reported that Debani's ID, stolen from her 2.5 months prior during a robbery, was discovered. A resident of Building 15, where a search had already taken place, found the ID in a flower bed of the residential complex. Nonetheless, this find has not yet contributed to solving the case. Then, new information was reported in the media. Mario accused the Nuevo Leon prosecutor's office of hiding the results of a second autopsy on Debani's body. In there, the findings indicate that she did not suffer multiple blows to the head from blunt objects. However, medical examiners noted bruises on both sides of her head, her forehead, both eyelids, the left side of her nose, her lips, and around her ears. The report suggests that the varying severity of head injuries was likely caused by external impact, pointing to the likelihood that these injuries were inflicted by another person, this indicating a violent death rather than an accident. Furthermore, it was determined that Debani died before entering the water, as no water was found in her lungs. The report also revealed bruises and hematomas in the genital area, suggesting abuse violence. It dismissed the possibility of strangulation since there were no injuries to her neck. This has highlighted the persistent negligence of the police. It is troubling that, in today's world, the authorities are not trustworthy. The case of Debani Susana Escobar is not only a personal tragedy, but also a powerful reminder of the violence against women in Mexico. To date, no one has been arrested or charged in connection with her death, leaving her family and the public questioning the justice system and the safety of women in society. Debani has become a symbol of the fight against gender-based violence, a problem that affects an average of 10 women every day in Mexico. Despite protests and constant pressure from the community, the investigation and prosecution process has been slow, leaving the quest for justice for these young women a significant question mark. Debani's death has not only left her family heartbroken, but has also sparked outrage and a determination for change in society. But will this voice and struggle be enough to bring justice and end similar tragedies? The answer still lies in the future. Hey detectives, welcome back. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Russell Rusty and Rebecca Becky Porter. Russell Rusty and his wife, Rebecca Becky Porter, bought a farm in Willard, Missouri, USA, in 1957. At the time, it was a small settlement with a close-knit community where everyone knew one another. The crime rate was low, and life was peaceful, quiet. On April 19, 2011, Rebecca, aged 40, unexpectedly missed her scheduled shift at work. She hadn't mentioned any health issues beforehand, which raised concern among her coworkers and later her supervisors. That morning, the family's neighbors stepped out onto the porch and noticed Rebecca's car still parked outside. Rebecca typically left for work early, as she usually woke up at around 7:30 and left the house by 8 a.m. thinking she might be feeling unwell. The neighbor decided to check on her. However, when he knocked on the door, there was no answer. At first, he assumed she might be resting due to fatigue and didn't think much of it. But as the day went on and the house remained silent, his concern began to grow. Later, Rebecca's daughter, Jessica, arrived at the house, concerned because she hadn't been able to reach her mother by phone. The neighbor informed Jessica about the unusual situation. Together, they knocked on the door, but still, no one answered. When they peered through a window, they saw the house in disarray, leading them to contact the police. Their call followed an earlier one placed by Rebecca's son, who had already reached out to law enforcement after being unable to contact his mother. He expressed his concern and requested a welfare check for the Porter family. When the patrol arrived at the house, they were immediately hit by a strong smell of cleaning products, noticeable even from the porch. The officers inspected the property and peered through the windows. Inside, they found the house in total disarray, particularly in the kitchen and the main bedroom. In the bedroom, the bed was out of order, the mattress tilted, the blanket pulled off, and belongings like a handbag and a mobile phone scattered across the floor. There were clear signs of a struggle, which made the house resemble a crime scene. In the kitchen, they discovered a cut window screen, suggesting it might have been used as the entry point for a burglary. The situation seemed to point to a break-in. However, upon entering the house, the officers uncovered something that didn't support the burglary theory. Surprisingly, many valuable items were untouched despite the chaotic state. Rebecca and Russell were nowhere to be found, fueling suspicions of foul play. The police's findings prompted them to seal off the area and launch an investigation into possible kidnappings. When Rebecca's son arrived at the farm, he assisted the police by providing helpful insights. What deeply concerned him was the presence of his stepfather's medication, which was still at the house. Russell, his stepfather, relied on these pills every day after medical treatment, and Russell would never leave them behind if he left the house. Rebecca's wallet, which she always carried with her, was found in the marital bedroom. Her car remained parked outside the house, and inside the car were her bank cards, with the key left in the ignition. This raised serious concerns, as it was clear something alarming had occurred. Although the house had a strong smell of cleaning products, only one bottle of bleach was found, and it was still full. No empty containers of cleaning products were discovered, yet it was evident they had been used very recently. This seemed suspicious. Someone had likely discarded them after use. It appeared the perpetrator had quickly poured bleach over various areas in an attempt to erase evidence, with pools of bleach still visible in some spots. The police found a computer monitor under the table, but the rest of the system was missing. It appeared to have been disassembled, as some wires were still present. Upon investigation, the police discovered that this computer managed multiple cameras located both inside and outside the house. The theft of the system unit meant all the stored data had also been taken. It was clear the perpetrator had stolen the evidence to prevent it from falling into the detectives' hands. Additionally, it was determined that all the cameras were connected to a single security system. The system had sent out an alarm prior to the incident, but no response was received. Investigators noted the unusually large number of CCTV cameras, which covered the entire property without any blind spots. Such extensive security measures in a quiet, safe neighborhood raised suspicions. Many assumed the system was installed to comfort Rebecca, whose nerves and fearfulness had grown with age. However, the situation was concerning since they lived in an area where residents were familiar with one another and serious crimes had not occurred in years. The police theorized that they might have felt threatened or frightened by someone, possibly an enemy, who acted against them. The stolen cleaning products indicated that the criminal might have been trying to erase evidence of blood, leading investigators to fear the worst. However, Rebecca and Russell's children rejected this idea. They argued their parents had no enemies, were peaceful by nature, and rarely engaged in conflicts, let alone provoke someone to commit a crime. The neighbors were also shocked by the news. The Porters were viewed as deeply religious and upstanding people, attending church every Sunday and frequently participating in neighborhood events. They seemed friendly to everyone. However, people who knew the family better informed police about Russell's troubled past. Before meeting Rebecca, he had struggled with alcohol and substance addiction, which raised the possibility of him relapsing into old habits, accruing debts, or associating with dangerous individuals. However, there were no recent signs of such behavior. Rebecca made great efforts to help Russell overcome his problems and prevent relapse. Many neighbors heard these speculations, and rumors began spreading. Some even believed a Mexican cartel might have been involved in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. Meanwhile, the police explored different possibilities, such as one spouse harming the other and fleeing, or both voluntarily ending their lives together. Bloodstains were discovered in the house despite attempts to clean, reinforcing the police's theory of a violent crime. However, even by the third day of the investigation, there were no concrete leads or evidence. Rebecca and Russell were officially declared missing, and the search efforts intensified. Authorities suspected at least one person had been harmed in the house. Suspicion grew as both spouses had left behind essential personal belongings they used daily, suggesting they might both be victims. Neighbors and friends were left wondering and trying to figure out what had happened to Rebecca and Russell. Everyone was bewildered by their sudden and inexplicable disappearance. As more time passed without any sign of them, anxiety grew among family members and local residents. Disturbing rumors spread throughout the community, creating fear among the public. Approximately 5,000 flyers featuring pictures of Rebecca and Russell were printed. Family members and volunteers distributed them widely, placing them at gas stations, grocery stores, truck stops, and other areas frequented by locals. The local cycling community has joined in a search effort, assisting by interviewing residents for clues to Rebecca and Russell's whereabouts. A reward has been offered, and detectives have been working closely with relatives and friends of the family to gather information about the surroundings, identify possible suspects, such as the kidnapper or killer. They also investigated any recent or past conflicts the Porters might have had with other people. Through this, it was revealed that a family member, Robert Campbell, had been involved in a dispute with Russell. Robert, who drove a pickup truck, lived near the Russells and became the primary suspect in their disappearance. Detectives begin investigating his life and relationships, uncovering a long-standing conflict between him and the Russell family. Their disputes often escalated into heated arguments, and about 3 weeks before Rebecca and Russell vanished, the tension reached a breaking point. Both parties obtained restraining orders against each other. Naturally, detectives approached Robert at his home to question him about the incident leading up to Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. It was revealed that Robert had been claiming ownership of the family farm, even though he had no legal rights to it. Previously, Robert had lived on the property until new owners, Russell, who inherited the farm from his grandfather, and his wife Rebecca, moved in. Robert was upset by this, believing that, as the former owner's son, he was entitled to the property. However, he had been excluded from the will due to strained family relationships. Most of the conflict revolved around the farm. Robert proposed splitting the farm with Russell, but Russell refused and presented the ownership documents. This refusal fueled Robert's resentment. Robert believed his claims were valid because, prior to Russell and Rebecca moving in, he had worked on the house. He had renovated the facade, built a second floor, and invested time, money into improving the property. Nevertheless, when Russell took over, they effectively evicted him and dismissed his investments as irrelevant. Rebecca and Russell explained to Robert that, according to the legal documents, he had no rights to the property. His investments did not entitle him to any portion of the farm. Despite this, Robert felt wronged. He demanded that Rebecca and Russell either vacate the property, share ownership, or at least compensate him for his expenses. Unfortunately, they were unable to reach any form of agreement. The situation escalated, and it was clear that no resolution would come from the Supreme Court. This created an opportunity for Robert to remove both Rebecca and Russell, as well as seize their property. Detectives observed that Robert was behaving very possessively toward the property that originally belonged to Russell's grandparents and had not been passed down to him. He held deep resentment toward the family, particularly Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, due to ongoing conflicts, he moved his new trailer about half a kilometer away from the farmhouse. Robert seemed to have a strong motive for violent actions, including an attack, kidnapping, or even murder, given the long-standing disputes with the family. Although Robert denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance, claimed that he had an alibi, the evidence complicated matters. On the day of the incident, he was reportedly 150 kilometers away in another city on a business trip with his wife. Despite this alibi, police appeared to piece together a narrative suggesting his involvement. Robert, who lived only a few hundred meters away from the Russells, openly expressed interest in their property and became subject to a restraining order. The farm's CCTV cameras were likely installed due to concerns about him. Witnesses confirmed frequent arguments between Robert and the family. On one occasion, he was seen driving by their home, yelling out the window that their time there was limited, perceived by some as a threat. It was plausible that Robert could have hired someone to carry out the crime since he had a clear motive and might have wished to avoid direct involvement. But could he really harm his own relatives and their spouse? As investigations dug deeper, it was revealed that Robert harbored significant resentment toward them as recently as a year before their disappearance. Rebecca had previously been married before meeting Russell. Her first husband, Terrence, was a local church pastor. Their divorce was complex and highly controversial. 4 months after the split, Rebecca met Russell. At that time, Russell was battling an addiction to illegal substances and alcohol. However, after meeting Rebecca, she became a positive influence in his life, like a breath of fresh air. From the very beginning, she seemed determined to help him overcome his struggles. Russell later admitted that her presence gave him a renewed sense of purpose. Rebecca was more than 10 years older than Russell, which initially unsettled his family. However, they eventually accepted the relationship. On the other hand, Rebecca's family reacted much more negatively. Following her divorce, Rebecca lived with her children and parents, but they strongly disapproved of Russell. As a result, her children stayed with their grandparents and distanced themselves from their mother, upset by her decision to pursue a relationship with a much younger man who had serious addiction issues. In fact, they refused to attend Rebecca and Russell's wedding. The ongoing discord between Rebecca and Terrence wasn't unusual and didn't initially seem like a strong motive for the attack. However, the intricate divorce process brought up several questions, especially concerning a restaurant they had opened and co-owned during their marriage. Neither of them wanted to split the business during the divorce, which could have provided a financial motive for Terrence to target her and her new husband, Russell. At this stage of the investigation, detectives had not identified any other potential suspects. The focus shifted to 2 individuals, Uncle Robert Campbell, who had a strained relationship with Russell, and ex-husband Terrence Fraser, who might have financial grievances against Rebecca. Investigators approached Terrence, a church pastor, to learn more about his recent interactions with Rebecca. Unlike Robert, Terrence appears genuinely distressed from the start and seems deeply saddened by Rebecca's disappearance. His behavior stood in stark contrast to Robert's and showed no signs of recent conflict. Terrence had moved on with his life and appeared content, expressing sincere regret over the disagreements during their divorce. He admitted he could have been kinder at times and acknowledged his past mistakes with genuine remorse. The police continued to stay in contact with Rebecca's and Russell's relatives and friends during the investigation. One of Russell's friends shared some intriguing information. The family's property had been targeted by multiple crimes in the past. This suggested they might have had more enemies than anyone had realized. For instance, a few months before the disappearance, there had been an incident of agricultural theft on their farm. In response, Russell had installed video cameras on the property. Robert was also investigated for possible involvement. However, it was confirmed that he couldn't have committed the crime during that time because he was far from the city. Despite this, his intense dislike for Russell raised suspicions that he might have orchestrated the crime. At the time of the incident, Robert was working as a truck driver and was traveling to Texas. Separately, Terrence was also ruled out as a suspect through further checks. This led to the theory that the Porters might have had other, less obvious enemies unknown to the police. Eventually, the investigation appeared to hit a dead end. About a week after Russell and Rebecca disappeared, an unexpected development occurred. Early one morning, the station received a call reporting that Donald and Helen Willingham had been found stabbed to death in their home. The police immediately noticed several similarities between this case and the Porters. Both homes were broken into without warning, nothing of value was stolen, and the level of brutality was extreme. However, unlike the first incident, the bodies in this case were not removed, nor was there an attempt to clean up the crime scene. The reason? A neighbor had frightened the perpetrator. The witness even chased a man wearing a black hoodie for a short while but failed to catch him. The suspect managed to escape, but the neighbor promptly reported the incident to the police around 5 a.m. The investigation into the second case revealed troubling parallels. The Willingham family bore a striking resemblance to the Porters. Both women, Helen and Rebecca, were actively involved in their local church. Helen was married to Donald, the local church pastor, just as Rebecca had once been. This raised fears of a possible serial killer or a connection between the two families. Despite intense efforts by law enforcement, progress in both investigations was limited. The police thoroughly examined the relatives of the Willingham family, their close acquaintances, and the timeline leading up to the crime. As in the case of the Porter family, several suspects were identified, but each was ruled out after further questioning. Both cases appeared to be at a standstill until July 2011, when the situation took a turn. In that month, a man named Jose Huckleberry was taken into custody at the station, accused of committing a burglary in Greene County. During a 7-hour interrogation, he confessed to killing Donald and Helen but denied having any role in the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. Eventually, investigators confirmed he could not have been responsible for the Porters' disappearance, as he had a solid alibi. Both the cases of the Porter family and the Willingham family exhibit striking similarities and notable differences, particularly regarding the motives and methods of the murderer. As a result, Jose was removed from the list of suspects in the Porters family case. Later, a police informant who had recently been released from prison claimed to possess valuable information regarding the disappearance of Rebecca and Russell. The informant stated that a prisoner named Tony had boasted during a conversation that he took away the birthdays of Rebecca and Russell, a phrase in criminal slang meaning that he killed them. Although the detectives were skeptical of this claim, they decided it was worth continuing to investigate the lead. The police began investigating Tony. They first reviewed the location data from his mobile phone to determine whether he might have been near the Porters family's residence on the night of their disappearance. In parallel, they delved into Tony's background. The inquiry revealed that he had a history of burglary, primarily targeting electronics and household appliances. Notably, his criminal patterns seemed to align with the theft of items from the Porter family's home, including a computer system unit, potentially linking him to the case. At the time of the investigation, Tony was in jail awaiting charges for another burglary. Detectives arranged to speak with him directly, but Tony denied any involvement in Rebecca and Russell's disappearance. The family recounted Tony's tumultuous past, claiming that he had experienced problems from a young age. He had consistently found himself in trouble and had been connected to the criminal world since his school years. Investigators interviewed Tony's family and uncovered a long-standing conflict among the family members. Some relatives hadn't seen Tony for years and were unaware of his circumstances. Others, like his cousin Dusty Hicks, remained in contact and actively cooperated with the investigation. Eventually, Tony revealed he might have information about a crime involving the Porters. He told the police he could lead them to a location where the Porters' bodies might be hidden, an old hut in the forest. Tony led the police to the site. As they neared the hut, a foul odor grew stronger. Once inside, the smell was overwhelming. In the floorboards, they found a hole concealing a grave filled with garbage and human remains. By this time, 3 months had passed since Rebecca and Russell had gone missing, and the condition of the bodies was severely deteriorated. Identification wasn't immediately possible, and forensic examination was necessary to confirm the victims' identities. Experts have confirmed, through dental records and DNA analysis, that the bodies belonged to Rebecca and Russell. The case was reclassified from a disappearance to a double murder. Investigators concluded that they had been attacked in the head at close range with a weapon. They was found wearing pajamas, suggesting they were likely attacked during the night or early morning while sleeping. It's strange when bodies are found deep in the forest, far from their homes. This area is difficult to access, and for a long time, the question arose, how could a stranger know about this place? The truth was later revealed. Tony's cousin, Dusty Hicks, was an accomplice. Dusty disclosed that Tony was part of a gang, which included several of his childhood friends. They often commit crimes, mainly by breaking into houses and stealing to unlawfully benefit from others' property. Until the Porter family's murders, the gang had no history of violent crimes. Dusty revealed that he, Tony, Wendy Friend, Tony's wife, and their son, Philip, were involved in the massacre. Investigators decided to examine their phone records. Suspicious messages were discovered between Tony, Wendy, Philip, and Dusty. On April 18, 2011, they were near the Porters' family house, but their devices were switched off a few hundred meters away from the farm. The suspects confessed during interrogation that a specific customer had offered them $100,000 to carry out a double murder. Tony, the oldest and most experienced among them, influenced Philip and the others to join the criminal plan, driven by the promise of money. According to their statements, they prepared by wrapping their hands in a special adhesive film to avoid leaving fingerprints. Before heading to the Porter's farm, they bought a can of bleach, which they later used to wipe away evidence at the crime scene. To disable the CCTV system, they cut the wires, triggering an alarm. After cutting through a fence, they entered the house through a window. Tony carried a weapon, while the others assisted him. He went into Rebecca and Russell's bedroom, brandished the weapon at them, who had awakened, and instructed the accomplices to restrain them using plastic ties. They were then abducted and taken away in a pickup truck to an isolated forest area. Rebecca and Russell were left near a cabin in the woods, where their bodies were later discovered. Philip, one of the suspects, disclosed that Tony and Dusty led them deeper into the forest. Approximately 10 minutes later, he heard the sound of weapons exploding, followed a few minutes later by another explosion, signaling the deaths of Rebecca and Russell. Their bodies were buried hastily in a makeshift grave. The perpetrators returned to the Porter's family home to clean up the crime scene and stole a computer containing footage from the CCTV cameras to eliminate incriminating evidence. The police focused on the person who ordered the crime, someone willing to pay $100,000 to kill two innocent people. Tony eventually revealed a name, Robert Campbell. It made sense to the investigators, as Robert, Russell's uncle, had more than one motive. He wanted revenge for being evicted, but there was something deeper. Russell and Rebecca knew a terrible secret about him, though the exact details were never revealed. Russell and Rebecca suspected that Robert was involved in illegal activities, specifically selling stolen equipment. They had gathered evidence and were planning to report him to the police. To prevent this, Robert turned to his friend Tony, who organized a group to carry out the murders. The entire gang was eventually arrested. Although Robert denied any involvement, insisting that he hadn't done it, the police dismissed his claims. The prosecutor charged all 5 individuals involved. Tony's friend admitted guilt in 2 counts of first-degree murder and received a life sentence without parole. Dusty Hicks was sentenced to 2 life terms. Wendy Friend also received a life sentence. Philip Friend cooperated with authorities, testifying against the others, which led to a reduced sentence. Robert Campbell went to trial, and despite the evidence being circumstantial, he was convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to 2 life terms without parole. Even Robert's wife, Carolyn, faced potential prosecution for aiding him in committing perjury, but she ended her life before any charges could be filed. Hello, crime enthusiasts. Are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Karen Leylen Oviedo. Rolando Angel Aquino was born in 1987 in Bolivia and later moved to Guaymalan, Argentina. He is the oldest of 7 siblings and started working at the age of 14 to support his parents. In his youth, Rolando met Carolina Chavez, and in 2007, they had a son together. They eventually separated. Later, he entered a relationship with Maria Soledad Guardia, with whom he had another son, Elias. Despite their breakup, Rolando remained involved in his children's lives. Elias cherished his father and enjoyed spending time with him, even after his parents parted ways. Meanwhile, Rolando maintained relationships with his ex-wives and always prioritized his sons, ensuring that he remained in contact despite not living with them. Eventually, Rolando started a relationship with Karen Leylen Oviedo. Karen is an outgoing and friendly woman, born on March 30, 1990. In 2016, they moved in together and started their own business. Besides running a business with Karen, Rolando also worked at a market that specialized in wholesale fruit sales. To the neighbors, Rolando and Karen appeared loving and happy. However, it was clear that Karen was the dominant figure in their relationship. Someone once shared that Rolando had caught her in a car with her lover and reacted violently, almost destroying the vehicle. Despite this incident, things eventually calmed down, and he forgave her. Based on their social media photos, the two seemed to share genuine affection and enjoyed being together. Before meeting Rolando, Karen already had 2 daughters. One of the fathers of her daughters is Raul Ojeda, whom she married in 2013. After a while, Raul left his family. He was originally the owner of a successful shoe store, earning a good income, while Karen worked at a clothing boutique. Over time, the family encountered financial difficulties, which made the atmosphere unbearable. Feeling threatened, he made the decision to leave. Pretending he needed to buy something, he secretly fled the city, traveled to another country, and intentionally changed buses multiple times until arriving in Paraguay. He made sure his movements were untraceable to the residents of Noto. Elias, the youngest son of Ronaldo and his ex-wife, frequently visits his father. They made it a point to spend the 2019 holidays together, which Elias greatly enjoyed. However, according to Karen, Elias was somewhat distant in his interactions with her and her family. In the summer of 2019, Elias went to see Rolando and Karen again. At that time, the boy, who was 9 years old, was excited to turn all the plans he had discussed with his father into reality. On the morning of July 12, 2019, before heading to work, Rolando checked on Elias in his room to wish him good morning. He immediately noticed the boy was unwell and decided to take him to a children's hospital. After doctors examined Elias, it became clear that his condition was critical and required urgent care in the intensive care unit. Despite the doctor's efforts, young Elias passed away after hours in a coma. Relatives revealed that Elias had left home without showing any unusual symptoms and arrived at his father's house appearing healthy. However, the medical report stated that he succumbed to third-degree poisoning, which led to multiple organ failure and cerebral thrombosis. Since his medical records showed he was a healthy boy, doctors requested an additional forensic examination. Nevertheless, Elias's mother and grandmother refused the procedure, considering it too harsh for the deceased. Karen suggested cremation but then decided against it. She chose to bury Elias in a private cemetery, where she could visit and leave flowers. Rolando, devastated by his son's death, gradually healed as time went by. 16 months after the tragedy, he proposed to Karen, and the two married. Unfortunately, their happiness was short-lived. On February 7, 2022, 35-year-old Rolando suddenly fell ill. He experienced severe vomiting before losing consciousness in his living room. Emergency services were called immediately. Karen opened the door to let the medical team in, and they found Rolando still lying on the floor. After regaining consciousness, Rolando was transported to the Santa Maria clinic via ambulance, although another account suggests Karen herself drove him to the hospital. Despite the doctor's best efforts to save Rolando, he did not survive and passed away on February 9. The cause of death was determined to be severe poisoning. His sudden and unexpected death brought up many questions. Given that Rolando was healthy and regularly participated in sports, the medical staff interviewed his wife to gather more information. When asked if Rolando was taking any medications, Karen replied that he was. She said that her husband had been taking a medication to lighten dark spots on his skin. However, this information causes experts to be skeptical. Test results showed abnormally high levels of oxalate and calcium crystals in Rolando's body, which are classic signs of ethylene glycol poisoning, a key ingredient commonly found in car antifreeze. Given the unusual circumstances of Rolando's death and concerns raised by his family, authorities stepped in to investigate further. They ordered various forensic tests and interrogated Karen, who provided conflicting statements during questioning. As a result, she was detained for the investigation, and her phone was confiscated. Rolando's death deeply affected those close to him, including his friends and teammates. The news also shocked others in the community, including visitors to the warehouse, Raul, and local residents. People found it difficult to understand how a seemingly healthy man could pass away so suddenly and unexpectedly. Raul, Karen's ex-husband, was shocked when rumors began circulating about deliberate poisoning. He described Karen as affectionate and nonviolent during their marriage. Investigators questioned Karen about the substance she gave Rolando, and she claimed it was a remedy for skin spots, administered with a dropper. When asked to provide the bottle, Karen stated that their housekeeper had already discarded it. However, the housekeeper, Claudia Cortez, contradicted Karen, asserting she hadn't disposed of the bottle. Claudia also mentioned overhearing a conversation where Rolando told Karen he disliked what she was giving him. The prosecutor's office initiated an investigation to gather information in Karen's household neighborhood. Neighbors reported seeing Karen repeatedly administering medications to her husband. Doubts were raised about the circumstances surrounding Rolando, prompting investigators to consider that Karen may have intended only to temporarily sedate her husband, rather than harm him. However, the Department for Technological Crimes dismissed this theory based on their findings. After examining Karen's phone, investigators discovered that she had searched for queries such as "what is the deadliest poison?" and "how to delete search history." Furthermore, evidence revealed that she had ordered ethylene glycol from an online store twice in the days leading up to her husband's death. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention's Agency for Toxic Substances, ethylene glycol is a synthetic liquid that absorbs water and is commonly used in the production of antifreeze. It is odorless, has a sweet taste, and is highly toxic to humans. Based on preliminary findings from the forensic examination conducted by the Supreme Court, investigators charged Karen with intentionally poisoning Rolando by diluting a toxic substance with orange juice. Consuming the drink caused Rolando to suffer severe poisoning over the weekend of February 5th and 6th, leading to a rapid decline in his health. He was admitted to the emergency room on Monday and subsequently passed away. By mid-February, authorities compiled sufficient evidence against Karen, and on February 16th, she was formally charged with aggravated murder. Rolando's death and the subsequent investigation raised suspicions about the circumstances surrounding the death of 9-year-old Elias. Authorities launched a new inquiry into Karen's potential involvement in the boy's death. Upon reviewing Elias's medical history, the prosecutor's office noted that Karen claimed he was healthy and energetic, but during a stay at his father's home, the child suddenly fell into a coma from which he never recovered. The death certificate stated that Elias died due to internal organ failure and brain thrombosis. However, investigators questioned whether such causes were plausible for a healthy child of his age. The prosecutor's office uncovered evidence linking Karen to the purchase of ethylene glycol. Store records confirmed that she purchased the substance on July 2, 2019, shortly before Elias moved into her household. Furthermore, Elias's relatives revealed that Karen had strongly advocated for cremating the boy's remains, despite his biological mother opposing the idea and choosing burial instead. Based on the accumulated evidence, prosecutor Claudia Rios charged Karen with aggravated murder on March 4, alleging that she had poisoned Elias. On March 14, the court approved a pretrial detention order for Karen. Although she appealed the decision, the judge upheld the ruling, requiring her to remain in custody until the trial. The trial commenced on Monday, November 28, 2022, at the criminal court in Mendoza, nearly 10 months after the alleged incident. The case focused on Karen and two separate charges, the murder of Elias and the murder of Rolando. Prosecutor Gustavo Fellman handled the first charge, while prosecutor Claudia Rios managed the second. Javier Aquino, Rolando's eldest son and 15 years old at the time, acted as the plaintiff, supported by legal representation. In their opening statements, the prosecution argued that Karen had murdered Elias and later Rolando by giving them orange juice mixed with ethylene glycol. This toxic substance caused severe poisoning, ultimately leading to multiple organ failure. Karen's defense, however, challenged the prosecution's allegations, contending that there was no direct evidence linking her to the crimes. The defense attorney also highlighted that Karen lacked a clear motive for the murders, as she had already secured ownership of the house, 2 cars, and the family business. Additionally, they refuted the prosecution's assertion that Karen had used her phone to make suspicious purchases or research ethylene glycol online, undermining allegations that she had previously used the poison to harm Elias. While condemning the actions that led to the deaths as deplorable, the defense reminded the court that no conviction should occur unless guilt is conclusively proven. Karen, labeled by the media as the poisoner, took the stand after the initial testimonies concluded. Following a request from her lawyer, the judge permitted her to speak. Karen firmly declared her innocence, stating that she had been falsely accused of committing a heinous crime. She expressed her distress at the idea that someone was trying to frame her as the murderer. Her lawyer emphasized to the jury that the accusations against her were baseless. Karen claimed that Rolando may have hacked into her account to purchase antifreeze. According to her testimony, when the package containing antifreeze arrived, Rolando told her not to touch it, left the house, and took the parcel with him. Karen also stated that she had a verifiable alibi. On February 6, the day Rolando began to feel unwell, she claimed that she wasn't at home. Instead, she had gone to a beauty salon and then to the gym, returning later to find her husband already vomiting. During her statement, Karen criticized the prosecutors, accusing them of immorality for implicating her, a mother of 2 young daughters, in the murder of a child, Elias. The prosecution then requested permission to cross-examine Karen. They asked if she had suggested cremating Elias. She denied this, asserting that it was not her decision and that she had never said anything of the sort. During the trial, prosecutors introduced various witnesses, including family members of Elias. Maria, Elias's mother, testified that after her son's death, Rolando told her about Karen suggesting cremating the boy's body so that each family could keep the ashes for 1 week. However, Maria rejected this suggestion. She also told the jury that during a meeting at the cemetery, Rolando mentioned Karen's jealousy, claiming she even slept in a separate bed because of it. Carolina, who is Rolando's first wife, also testified. She confirmed that, according to Rolando, he and Karen slept in separate beds. Carolina mentioned that she had never met or spoken to Karen before. However, on the morning of February 8, Karen called her directly to report that Rolando was ill and had been hospitalized. During the conversation, Karen mentioned that Rolando might have taken some medication that caused him to feel unwell. She also asked Carolina for help unlocking Rolando's phone, saying she suspected he might be involved with another woman. Carolina was shocked to hear about Rolando's condition, as he had appeared perfectly fine just days earlier when they met. She explained that when they arrived at the clinic, Karen went ahead to speak with the doctors, while she was asked to wait outside because she was not allowed to enter. Carolina found the situation very strange. Determined to get answers, she contacted the doctor directly and demanded to know why she hadn't been allowed to see her ex-husband. The doctor explained that Rolando had lost consciousness, had not regained it, and was unresponsive to all treatments. Carolina then went to the secretary's office to file a formal complaint. During another conversation with Karen, Carolina learned that Rolando had taken syrup for a skin condition, which had caused an allergic reaction. Karen added that the bottle was no longer in the house, as the housekeeper had thrown it away. Karen also stated that she was covering all the medical expenses and told Carolina that there was no reason for her to stay any longer. Furthermore, Karen tried to convince Carolina that Rolando had expressed a wish to be cremated, suggesting that his ex-wife should support this decision. The jury also heard testimony from doctors, police officers, and expert witnesses during the trial. Among them was pediatrician Ivana Marinelli, who treated Elias during his hospitalization in July 2019. Dr. Marinelli explained that the boy had been brought to the hospital struggling to breathe and required emergency intubation. A CT scan revealed severe cerebral thrombosis, and intensive therapy was initiated. She confirmed that Elias's symptoms, such as altered consciousness, anxiety that escalated into a coma, were consistent with ethylene glycol poisoning. After treatment, Elias's condition worsened rapidly. At approximately 5 p.m. on July 12, he suffered cardiac and respiratory arrest. The medical team attempted resuscitation for 50 minutes, with the boy's father present, but all efforts proved unsuccessful. At 6 p.m., the boy was pronounced dead. During the trial, the prosecutors presented the jury with a psychological report about Karen, based on Dr. Hayes' observations. Defense attorney Luis Torres argued that Karen had lied and concealed the truth. She painted Karen as someone who attempted to appear virtuous but was, in reality, unemotional, cruel, and uncooperative. The debate persisted while prosecutor Gustavo Fellman shared further details. Gustavo read from Karen's psychiatric report, highlighting the doctor's assessment of her relationships as being self-serving and primarily aimed at personal gain. The report also noted that Karen underwent a psychological evaluation shortly after the death of her husband, Rolando. However, she showed no signs of distress or emotional trauma over the loss. Describing Karen's personality, Gustavo stated that she was highly self-centered, concealed her negative attitudes toward others, exhibited overly controlled hostility, and harbored suppressed impulsive behaviors. There was no evidence to support Karen's claim of being a victim of gender-based violence. Before the guilty verdict was delivered, the prosecutor firmly argued to the jury that all evidence pointed to Karen having meticulously planned and carried out both murders without raising suspicion. She knowingly purchased ethylene glycol, disposed of its packaging, and disguised it as juice. After Elias and Rolando fell ill, she made no effort to help them. Instead, she attempted to destroy evidence and portrayed herself as a victim. The prosecutor submitted a list of ethylene glycol purchases made using Karen's account in connection with Rolando's murder. The prosecutors and the plaintiff urged the jury to deliver a unanimous guilty verdict, emphasizing that it was the only path to justice. They argued for Karen to be convicted of murder with aggravating circumstances. However, the defense argued that the prosecutor's office lacked solid evidence linking Karen to the deaths of Elias and Rolando. The defense attorney contended that while a person can appear virtuous and still commit a crime, it is equally possible for someone to have flaws and yet be innocent of any wrongdoing. The defense acknowledged that they could not present evidence that fully absolved Karen. Consequently, on December 1, 2022, the 12 members of the jury found Karen Leylen Oviedo guilty of murder in the death of Elias. She was also convicted of Rolando's death under aggravating circumstances, having used a treacherous method. Karen, dressed in black and wearing a white rosary around her neck, showed no emotion as the verdict was read. She was sentenced to life imprisonment. Following the verdict, the defense attorney questioned the jury's ability to make an impartial decision, arguing that they lacked legal expertise and a thorough understanding of the evidence. He also criticized the judicial process in Argentina, claiming it differs significantly from that in the United States and other developed countries with stronger legal safeguards. Despite these objections, Karen is now acknowledged as one of Argentina's most notorious criminals for poisoning Elias and Rolando. Although Karen was convicted, it does little to ease the sorrow of Rolando's and Elias's relatives. It remains unclear why Karen, a mother of two, took the lives of her loving and faithful husband and their son, who had his entire future ahead of him. Karen, the calculated poisoner, tried to evade justice. Had she succeeded in convincing authorities to cremate the bodies, she might have received a lighter sentence or even eventual release. The exact motive behind her actions has never been revealed. The families of Rolando and Elias still seek answers, but they may never find them, as Karen has never admitted guilt. Despite seemingly having a perfect life, a house, a car, financial stability, and an income higher than her husband's, she committed this shocking crime. She never took out life insurance on her husband, which makes her actions all the more perplexing. Now, she faces a life sentence behind bars.